listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
It's going to be a long, hot summer in the Persian Gulf. Well, isn't it always? And in the Levant, where today in Lebanon, a Hezbollah funeral was fired upon, and the country described by someone who knows, to me, to be on the brink of civil war again. And Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States of America, has promised retribution, having appointed himself judge, jury, and executioner in the mysterious affair of an Israeli-owned tanker sailing off the coast of Iran, as they do, which was then attacked by persons unknown. Well, Blinken knows he's found Iran guilty as charged by Blinken and by Israel, and retaliation is about to follow. It's going to be a long, hot summer for Mrs. Johnson also. She has announced she's pregnant with the couple's second child. We'll have something to say about that during my monologue. And happy birthday to my own firstborn, lovely Lucy, soon herself to be the mother of 5. We are nothing if not prodigious in the Galloway family. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy ride because it's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
It is, you know, the Open University of the Airwaves. It is entirely free, and you can speak back to the teacher anytime you like, by telephone, by Twitter, by email even, directly into the studio here in London. If you're listening to us on FM on 105.5 in the Washington, D.C. area, then you are welcome. If you're listening right across the United States on AM from Burning City to Burning City, likewise. If you're listening around the whole world on SputnikNews.com, well, good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. But if you are amongst the 500,000 people, more than 500,000 people, who watch as well as listen to the show, then listen up. Al G, that's algorithm, who now runs Al Gore's internet, is always busy. He never sleeps. Al G is in complete command over whether or not you even know that I'm on the air, and for how long I'll be on, what I'll be allowed to say, which clips will be given free rein and which will be suppressed. But there are ways that you can confound Mr. Al G Rhythm. The first of them is, if you're watching on Facebook right now, either on my own Facebook page or on RT's multiple Facebook portals, please press share right now with everyone on your friend list, every contact that you have, so that they definitely know that we are currently on the air. If you're watching on my YouTube channel, please do subscribe if you are there, or on RT's multiple YouTube channels, you are also welcome. You are welcome to follow me on my Telegram channel. Very important channel that, because who knows if Al G gets particularly nasty, well, that'll be the last one that we are on. But let's make hay while the sun shines. You can watch me on Twitter, you can watch me on Telegram, you can watch me on Instagram normally, I think not tonight, alas. You can watch me on Twitch, and you can watch on multiple other channels, more than I could shake a stick at. Now, let me begin, because I may not be a gentleman, but I know how gentlemen behave, by congratulating the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and Mrs. Johnson on the pregnancy that they announced today, and commiserate on the miscarriage that was also referred to in this announcement. Boris Johnson has a lot of children. We're not sure how many he has, and he is not prepared to tell us. Partly because some of them were born in, shall we say, rather mysterious circumstances. But I don't want to be churlish. Any new life is blessed. It's a gift from God, and in this country, at least, very badly needed. We have a demographic time bomb ticking away underneath our feet. The number of young people of working age will very soon make it unsustainable for the rest of us beyond working age to be supported in terms of taxation, but also in terms of the jobs that need to be done to give help and sustenance to older people. We need more children. I have been advocating for decades that we need a child-centered taxation policy, and every fiscal means should be bent towards encouraging the birth rate in Britain. Now that we have a new Britain, we need an abundant new generation of British people. Because of abortion, we are 10 million people of working age shorter than we would have been. Because we're no longer in the freedom of movement game with the European Union, a significant number of people have left this country, and a not significant number of people continue to come in, usually by the dinghy from Calais, about which also more later. But we're experiencing labour shortages already. In the field of transport, trucking, for example, we've got fruit rotting in the fields. And this morning, for the second week running, I was informed by Arriva Trains that because of problems which can only now be described as a crisis in shortages of train crews, my train had to be cancelled. So I just got here by the skin of my teeth to present this show this evening. Labour shortages are being reported everywhere. Now, there's a number of things we can do about that, pending an increase in the birth rate and those babies growing up to be workers. The first is to put the wages up that are being offered by employers in Britain to people that don't want to take those jobs, can't afford to take those jobs. Did you know that some truckers, formerly the kings of the road in Britain, are being paid less than £10 per hour? I spoke to one in the last 2 or 3 hours, whose wage is £9.40 an hour, for driving a gigantic truck up the motorways, for sleeping in his truck 4 nights a week, for being away from his family for 4 nights a week and only getting home on the 5th night in the dead of night. £9.40, you're having a laugh. No wonder there's a shortage of truckers. A trucker in America, in a union, the Teamsters, much maligned Teamsters Union, will be earning 2 or 3 times that because of their trade union power. That's the second thing you can do if you're a worker. Make sure you join a trade union, because you'll have a much better chance of standing up to your employer's parsimony as a group of workers than you will as an individual. But there's lots of things that we can do through the taxation system to boost our birth rate. And it's a national imperative. So well done, Boris Johnson. on your children? I don't know how many. My goodness, we've got a poll on it. How many children does Boris Johnson actually have? A, 6, B, 7, C, 8. My guess would have been more than 8, actually. Anyway, it's going to be a long, hot summer in a much more serious way in the Middle East. Let's start in the Levant. Not only is Lebanon now bankrupt, official, not only has Lebanon been robbed blind, not only did Lebanon exactly 1 year ago suffer a still unexplained, devastating explosion, one of the biggest explosions short of a nuclear weapon that the world has seen since the Second World War, which devastated the city, killed a huge number of people, maimed, wounded, and damaged the mental health of a very large number of Beirutis, a city I know and love so well, but destroyed still more of the infrastructure and the housing in Lebanon, which has suffered generations now of civil war and conflict, because Lebanon is a plaything, a playground in which powers, oftentimes very far away, play their dirty games at the expense of the Lebanese people and the Palestinian people who live there as refugees in very significant numbers. My daughter was born on this day in 1982 when Israel was invading Lebanon. I have to specify the year because Israel has invaded Lebanon over and over and over and over again. But on that occasion, I had just myself escaped from Lebanon when the Israeli forces surrounded the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila, and the Lebanese phalangists, under Israeli protection, fell upon the unarmed, undefended refugees like wolves upon lambs. The people of Lebanon have suffered mightily. They've always walked a tightrope, but that tightrope may have snapped in the last couple of hours. A big funeral took place in Lebanon today of a businessman, a member of and a supporter of the Lebanese resistance group Hezbollah. That funeral was fired upon by multiple gunmen, as yet unidentified. And a source who was at the funeral said to me that the country was now on the brink of another civil war. We'll keep an eye on that and try and get calls in to the show on the current situation as it is developing. Here's the phone numbers, by the way, 08081 965522 if you're in the United Kingdom, 08081 965522. It's entirely free, remember. And if you're in the United States, again, entirely free, it's +1 844 944 3344. +1 844 944 3344. So call me if you can give me an update on what's happening in Lebanon as the show rolls on. Perhaps most dangerous of all is the situation in the Persian Gulf. I told you earlier that an Israeli-owned tanker, as they do, was sailing off the coast of Iran, innocently, a kind of regatta, just out for a sail in the waters of the Persian Gulf. Somebody attacked it. Iran says it was not them. America says it was them, and that a response is forthcoming. That too may come this evening. Who knows? The United States has its gun cocked at all times, and indeed the shots that the Trump administration fired towards Iran at the airport in Baghdad, killing General Soleimani, provoked the closest to all-out war between Iran and its neighbors and the United States that we have yet come to. That may change this very evening. There are all kinds of issues that we will be touching on this evening. These are only some of them. This is the birthday of Hugo Chavez. Well, a couple of days ago, this week was the birthday of Hugo Chavez, who was born less than a month before me. I have outlived him, but I will never be able to hold a candle to his greatness. I had the great honor of knowing him and of meeting him several times. And the last time I saw him was during his last election victory, when despite the vicissitudes of American hostility and the hostility of the satrapies of the United States in his neighborhood, particularly Colombia, but not only Colombia, Hugo Chavez won yet another election. Hugo Chavez was the most elected man on the earth, won more elections, more plebiscites than any other political leader on the earth. He was a force of nature. He was a devastatingly effective political leader, mass orator, and a man that people in large numbers, not just in Venezuela, all over the world, wanted to follow and to emulate. A new man in the same mold, though none could fill his shoes, has just been elected as the president of Peru. You can tell he's a good egg, President Castillo, because Labour MPs hate him already. Somebody called Chris Bryant a loathsome, slithering apology for a Labour MP in, God save them, the Rhondda Valley. Quite an infamous man, actually. A man who made £655,000 selling flats that you, the British taxpayer, paid for. A man who famously posed in his underpants on an early version of a dating site. A man who supported every war and every crime of the Tony Blair era, including, of course, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria, and I could go on. He issued a tweet before President Castillo had even taken the official oath of office, denouncing him as a Marxist. President Castillo is not a Marxist, I don't think, but whether he is or whether he isn't is a matter only for the people of Peru. What he is a man who has committed himself to tackling the grotesque inequalities that exist in his country, whose natural resources have been systematically looted for generations, for as long as I have been politically conscious. Castillo intends to keep the wealth of Peru in Peru and distribute it fairly amongst all Peruvians. That guarantees you the enmity of Labour MPs, doesn't it? Well, there's much, much more. I could go on. We'll be talking about the British political scene, about the American political scene, but perhaps especially tonight, we'll be talking about the propaganda offensive against China, reaching new heights or depths according to your point of view. China is being given the full Iraq treatment. It's only a matter of time before people shredders and every other calumny that was mobilized against the people of Iraq is brought onto the field against China. Heaven knows they've been accused of virtually everything else. We'll be talking to a real expert. Now, before I take a break, let me do the first question. In this week in 1961, the Beatles played their first gig at the Cavern Club. How much were they paid? A, nothing. B, £3. C, they passed the hat around and took a collection? Answer right after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Peter says the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really. And Yoda says, love the show, best entertainment and education on the airwaves.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Well, the Beatles were paid £3, between 4 of them, for their first gig in the Cavern Club in this week in 1961. Now, as it happens, my first guest is able to talk expertly on virtually every subject I raised in my introduction. In fact, let me correct that, on every subject in my introduction. In fact, he could have given that introduction. He is the maestro. He is the master of RT UK, journalist, broadcaster, host of RT's Going Underground, who lived for a time in Venezuela and knows the Persian Gulf rather well. Afshin, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Always wonderful to see you. You're looking wonderful as always. Let's start, can we, with Castillo in Peru, enemy number one for Chris Bryant, the Labour MP of the Ronda. Tell us what you know about him.
Well, I think that the fact that Western papers, NATO nation papers, are already starting to criticize Castillo, and he's only been in office a few days. So much was the support, presumably, for Fujimori, the relative of the previous dictator backed by Washington. I couldn't have done what you just did because I only met Hugo Chavez a couple of times. But I think when I lived in Venezuela, and I think this is important as regards Peru and the pink tide, the return of the pink tide if it ever went away, is that I was in Venezuela under Carlos Andres Perez, and people used to say, why are you voting him in? Why are you voting for him? Because he stole so much money last time. Maybe he won't steal as much money from the people this time. Chavez changed everything, didn't he? Yeah. He really did. He made people, no longer could people say, well, it's always like this. It's always going to be like this. And I think Peruvians, in electing Castillo, clearly are saying, no, basta, the Zapatista slogan. Things can change. You can have a different world. And that's why it's so moving for him in Peru, for Lula, maybe back in Brazil, for maybe Morales, certainly his colleagues in Bolivia, and the continuing strength of that Maduro government, despite Boris Johnson trying to overthrow the government and hosting Juan Guaido. No doubt Boris Johnson on Downing Street will host Fujimori. Who's he going to bring here now? And as for Chris Bryant, he came on to Going Underground. I don't even understand that, because I think he wants to shut RT down and stop, would want mother of all talk shows banned forever, such as the belief in free speech of the British Labour Party.
Exactly. So the pink tide is coming in again, isn't it? The countries that you mentioned, the determination of the AMLO government in Mexico, which has just defied President Biden and sent a ship full of aid to Cuba. the continued resilience of the government in Cuba, the changes in Argentina, and in many other Latin American countries. I think they were all celebrating the return of autocracy in Latin America prematurely, don't you?
Yes, but Joe Biden is president of the United States. In the past 48 hours, his Secretary of State Blinken, that great architect of wars under the Obama administration, I mean, they've announced new sanctions. I mean, such is the way the U.S. Biden's apologists will say, oh, it's because of the Florida Dade County vote. No one cares about that in Latin America. The street in the Western Hemisphere is against Washington, all those different countries you mentioned, and they will obviously look to supporting Havana because the greatest inspiration, maybe Guatemala, maybe Chile. But of course, you've talked so eloquently in the past. I've heard you talk about it so much, is that shining light of Cuba that has illuminated the entire global South and the developed world too.
Indeed. Let's turn to something that might put the lights out. Blinken has in the last hours found Iran guilty of attacking an Israeli-owned tanker in the Persian Gulf, clue being in the name, and promised that retribution will follow. What can you tell us about that?
No, Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary of Britain, has done the same. And I should say, when I lived in Venezuela, I also lived in Iran later. And the shock when I came back to London, they said Hezbollah used Margarita Island off the coast of Venezuela as some kind of training ground backed by Iran. You just see the conspiracy theories going on. Obviously, the main factor here as regards this ship incident, which Israel came to a conclusion about and immediately was on our NATO nation media, Comcast, Sky News, the British Broadcasting Corporation, so quick to be talking about this incident when only in the past few days 150 or more were wounded in Sheikh Jarrah in the West Bank in Palestine, let alone the continuing Israeli airstrikes on Syria and on Gaza, and the UN Special Rapporteur ongoing underground on Saturday's show calling war crimes out, and the fact that anyone facilitating, anyone helping Israel in its illegal occupation of settlements internationally recognized may be done, may be liable. That includes businesses, that includes Dominic Raab, because the British government supply the arms for all these Israeli weaponry raining down on some of the poorest people on earth, whilst the press here covers an Iranian shooting by a drone of a ship, one ship. They all may be liable for war crimes at the International Criminal Court. That's the story. And yet Boris Johnson's Chancellor is calling for a response. He said Britain will respond. I don't know, is that what you took from it, George? Because I didn't get that. What is Britain going to do with its aircraft carrier?
I'm not sure, because our aircraft carrier is currently off the coast of China, where it may well actually come to some bodily harm. I'll be talking to a Chinese guest later.
Can I just interrupt there? I mean, I think the Global South, just like we were talking about the streets of the Western Hemisphere, the Global South has had enough. And people are saying, okay, boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel doesn't seem to be working that much. These aircraft carriers, these ships, they are in these regions where they have no business being, according to, say, the Chinese Communist Party, as regards Her Majesty's Elizabeth II aircraft carrier. And I think a lot of Global South countries are now going, it's about time we have some sort of military retaliation against NATO nation governments that have been responsible for arming certainly the airstrikes on Syria in the past few days, let alone airstrikes on the assassinations in Iran and the airstrikes on the largest open-air prison camp in the world, Gaza.
Israel, in fact, bombed this week Palestine, Syria, and Iraq. That's a hat trick even by their standards. What do you think is going to happen now vis-a-vis this tanker? Are you expecting a military attack on Iran?
UN Special Rapporteur Michael Link called out Naftali Bennett, who has become the leader of Israel. I mean, he called him out as a war criminal by definition if the settlements are in violation of international law. So if Israel thinks of retaliating, he's just compounding the crimes being committed should the International Criminal Court adjudge that Naftali Bennett is a war criminal. So it will be up again to these other powers to start talking back. It's certainly not going to get anything from the Biden administration. Joe Biden, how long was he in office before he bombed Syria and Iraq? Let alone is now their media are complaining about the resurgence of the Mujahideen and the Taliban, formally backed by the United States, and the fact that these presumably moderate Syrian rebels backed by Britain and the United States are now helping the Taliban wipe out this civil society that British troops gave up their lives, and thousands of them were wounded for doing over 20 years.
Quite so. Look, we've toured the horizon. Let's go to Edinburgh. The Honourable Craig Murray, a distinguished former British ambassador, sacked by the Blair government for, and I quote his dismissal letter, over-focusing on human rights, unquote, is tonight behind bars in a cold prison cell in Saughton. It'll be some weeks, if at all, before he's moved to a softer billet in perhaps one of these white-collar open prisons. This is an elderly man, infirm, fragile, poor health. He's behind bars, just like Julian Assange, for doing journalism. No one cares about it, Afshin.
Yeah, this is not a free country. I mean, a lot of people are talking about Daniel Hale, who illuminated to all of us, revealed to us how U.S. drones were just killing men, women, and children. And I saw your film, Killing Kelly, available on Vimeo. I had to pay, I don't know what it was.
It's £4 to rent, £6.50 to own.
That's right. I mean, this is not a free country. We know that. We know that the UN Special Rapporteur on torture has talked about how Julian Assange was tortured. And I think all journalists now, all they can do when it comes to covering stories related to how we live, whether it be austerity, whether it be the military-industrial complex, is to dance around these draconian laws that we keep coming up against. Probably not even draconian laws here in Britain. I mean, obviously those were the Scottish laws regarding Ambassador Craig Murray, but of course Julian Assange, technically the Espionage Act in the United States. There has to be a greater and greater understanding amongst young journalists, everyone, to understand that there are tricks around this that you're going to have to play, at least up until Priti Patel and Boris Johnson bring up this consultation document that Johnson seems to be coming back from, saying that we could be presumably imprisoned for 14 years for having this discussion. I mean, it's very unclear what that consultation document on journalism here in Britain will mean as regards legislation.
It is odd, though, isn't it? I mean, even if you don't like Craig Murray, even if you hate everything he stands for, and that would count, in that number I would count the vast majority of British journalists and broadcasters, can't they see the peril to their profession and one day perhaps to them in a Britain where now two, Assange and Murray, journalists for doing journalism, are actually thrown into a dungeon?
Well, you know, I worked at the BBC Today programme when Andrew Gilligan was doing that story about David Kelly. I was a producer right there on the desk during that time. I went there and met Kelly. I've been around these journalists when they're trying to do something different. That all changed certainly after that. But then on the other hand, if you look at your appearances on Question Time and countless BBC and Sky News appearances, you know what these journalists are like. You know the class that these journalists emanate from and what side they're on. I mean, it doesn't take too far to think that many of them, in their deliberate ignoring of, let alone Craig Murray, ignoring of the most famous journalist on earth, Julian Assange, would prefer him dead.
Yes, and if we're not lucky, both men could die behind bars. As I say, Craig Murray is a fragile man in fragile health. He's been cast into this dungeon with scarcely a single dissenting voice anywhere at all in the media. I thought your opening statement was very profound. This is not a free country. And yet we, all of us, have long believed that it was, or wanted to believe that it was. It probably never was. It certainly isn't now. I just watched, speaking of films, Official Secrets, the story of the heroic young woman, Catherine Gunn, who, confronted with clear evidence of illegal activity by the British government in the run-up to the Iraq War, passed it indirectly to a former associate of both of us, Yvonne Ridley, who tried her best and finally, despite the efforts of the editor of The Observer and his revolting deputy, got it into the paper.
Yeah, but where are those guys now? I mean, everyone should see that film. Catherine Gunn, yeah, I met her. You probably know her as well. She's been on the show. I mean, I don't think she really lives in England now. I think she lives in Turkey.
She lives in Turkey, yeah.
Where have those Observer journalists gone? They went higher and higher up after trying to deliberately cover up information that could have stopped something that would have a war that killed, wounded, or displaced tens of millions of people. They went up. The Observer newspaper still exists.
The pro-war Observer. You're right, they all got promoted. The only people that lost their jobs were Andrew Gilligan, Greg Dyke, Gavin Davis, Piers Morgan, arguably, and me. We were the only people that lost our jobs over the Iraq War. Everyone else.
I left the Today program as well.
Good for you. Join this.
Anyway, I mean, obviously,
club.
We didn't suffer like the tens of millions of Iraqis, of people right across the Middle East. But of course, what I suppose amazes all of us is the same things are happening again and again and again. They happened over Libya, they happened over Syria, and now, should this tanker attack story that the Foreign Office seems to be taking so seriously that the British government is going to respond in some way, the same things are going to be told again. I think the people, obviously, of NATO nations, again, the street, as they call it, I mean, they surely will not fall for this another time. And I would hope that Boris Johnson would be loath to take us into actual war. And it's all just posturing, this sending around of aircraft carriers and hanging out with fraudsters like Juan Guaido.
Yes, but that depends on China not deciding enough is enough. And the moment may be coming where China decides to make an example of one of these NATO provocateurs literally sailing off their coast, bristling with weapons, perhaps even weapons of mass destruction. It requires some faith in China's quietude to believe that you can go on doing that, don't you think?
Yeah, I believe that's more to do with debt financing and the fact that the Chinese Communist Party continues to buy bonds on the US market. I mean, there's a lot of interconnectivity and interlinkage that people see as always being the thing that will stop China finally saying enough is enough. Well, we have to go in. And of course, as we know, the way China go into Afghanistan, the way they go into Syria is with construction and rebuilding societies, not destroying NATO equipment, even after, of course, the infamous destruction of their embassy in Yugoslavia in that John Major war.
That was perhaps the cloud no bigger than a man's hand, which is a harbinger of great storms to come. Afshin Rattansi, host of Going Underground, the best show on RT. Thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Here's my next question. On this day in 2003, the Hutton inquiry began in Britain. What was it about? A, the death of Dr. David Kelly. B, government leaks. C, the Lockerbie bombing. Answer. when I get back from this break.
Radio Sputnik.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've got
go
a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
The Hutton inquiry, of course, began in Britain on this day in 2003, and it was into the strange death of Dr. David Kelly. My film, made with the Irish director Sean Murray, a celebrated director who will once be, I think maybe just a couple of years from now, will be known by everyone in the film world. To talk about him as a rising star is obvious. We've made this film called Killing Kelly. It's available for now for rent and to purchase on Vimeo. I'm sure the link is there on the screen now. Vimeo.com/on-demand/Killing Kelly. To say it has been well received would be an understatement. It has been overwhelmingly well received by virtually every person, if not every person, who has watched it. I'm expecting it to develop into a bestseller, which will help me make another film, about which more later. How many children does Boris Johnson actually have? A, 6, 17% of you believe that one. B, 7, 26% of you believe that. C, 8, 57% of you believe that one. You can vote on my Twitter handle at George Galloway. Rob Sutton, I don't know this apropos what, says, quote, highly likely, the Tory phrase meaning we've got absolutely no evidence to back up our narrative, but you must believe us anyway. And Stuart says, congratulations on your 111th episode. 111. What a great number. And a credit to you. Well, the credit is entirely due to RT and to Sputnik, who have platformed this show, which has been running, remember, since January of 2006, but would now be in the Broadcasting Museum if it were not for RT and Sputnik. On the poll, how many children does Boris Johnson actually have? Vob says it's at least 8. Also worth remembering that the one before his first with his wife, Carrie, he refused to support the child until ordered to do so by a court of law. And Sabat says, true, but what a machine he is. Must be 8, minimum. And Mary, MD, says, why does it matter? As long as he can afford them, that's fine by me. It's no one's business anyway. If that's all people have got to worry about, then lucky them. I'm not sure that's entirely true, Mary, really, because, first of all, depending on how many it is, 6, 7, 8 or more, the prime ministerial salary of £150,000, less than a headmaster of a big school anywhere in Britain, will be insufficient to keep him. That will force him either into corrupt and corrupting relationships with rich men, or it will force him to have to give up his job. Trust me, I know about alimony. Alimony is very, very expensive, and it's forever. And Boris Johnson's children and ex-wives are such that the impact on his ability to do his job as Prime Minister is obvious. It's also the case that siblings should not be unknown to each other. Siblings should not have each other concealed from them. Siblings should not be conceived from other people's wives and then denied until proven in court. So, Mary, I get where you're coming from, but I'm not sure that it is entirely true, that it is nobody's business but his. Anyway, my next guest was the Messi of English football back in the day. He even looked like Messi, still does to some extent. He's got the elixir of youth. Last time I saw him was at the premiere of the aforementioned Killing Kelly. The former Manchester City and multiple other sides is now a football agent. He's also a good friend of mine, and that's more important. I welcome him back to the mother of all talk shows. Barry, thanks for joining us. You're looking wonderful. And
thank you, George.
There,
lovely to speak to you.
How has the Olympic Games done it for you? Have you paid any attention? I couldn't tell you the name of one single medal winner. Are you following it?
I've got to say very, very, very little. Up until this one, I think I've probably followed everyone really closely. There just seems to be a lack of something. I'm not sure what it is. What there definitely is a lack of, I'm sure that Boris Johnson's not a machine. That's a certainty. There just seems to be a lack, George. I don't know how to put my finger on it. I don't know if it's concentration. I don't know whether it hasn't received, for sure, in my opinion, the amount of publicity it's received in the past. It used to be huge, George, didn't it? You know, when we were building up to the Olympics, going back to the days, I mean, I'm going back to the days of Linford Christie, and then moving on to all these amazing athletes that took part in it, going back to when I was a little child, and you had people like Bruce Tullow running with bare feet, and the Olympics was amazing. Jim Ryan, the 1,500-meter runner, then going through to the Usain Bolts of this world. It really was a spectacle with absolutely fantastic a camaraderie amongst the athletes. There was an amazing amount of media coverage. The media coverage seems to have disappeared. And sadly, the coverage on COVID seems to have taken over from the media coverage of the Olympics. It's gone into the background, George, and I've got to say that I'm a little bit like you. I can only tell you a few people that have won the gold medals. The names are not there. The media coverage is not there. The publicity is not there. And the household names. George, we remember some great household names in the Olympics.
I can go right back. Do you remember Mary Rand?
Mary Rand, yeah.
I loved her. And so many. Flojo, you remember? Florence?
Flojo.
Flojo Joyner.
Zola Budd with no shoes on.
Zola Budd, exactly.
You know? It was amazing. Jim Ryan, I remember. Very tall, thin. Very.
And John Carlos, of course, with the great salute with the band shoe and the clenched fist and so on. Now let's unpackage this then, Barry, because you're right. The coverage of the Olympic Games is vastly less than it was. I mentioned last week the BBC, that used to be the go-to for the Olympic Games, has been outbid by the Discovery Channel. Now it's allowed only a license for one sport at a time, whereas they used to have these split screens and let's go to the javelin while we wait for the running to start and so on. All of that's gone.
It's gone.
Therefore, the names, which might otherwise be big, who knows? Some of the athletes that are there, if the coverage had been there, might have impacted on our consciousness. But because the coverage has not, then they have not. Now, why is that, apart from that BBC problem? Is there just too much going on, Barry? Is it that we used to all watch one or two TV stations, now we don't?
Well, we've got so many, George, and I'll tell you a thing that I don't think has helped. And, you know, my main sport, as you know, is football. Mm-hmm. And I was a footballer for many, many, many years. I've been an agent for many years. I was a coach. I was an assistant manager, etc., etc. One of the problems that happened, and it was in my opinion, it's caused the problem now. It's, you know, when you get the bounce back effect, I think this has been a bit of a bounce back effect where all the games were postponed or they were cancelled for the COVID situation. And then we had almost every day of the week 2 or 3 Premier League games, non-stop. And even people I know in football, and even me, I was getting sick of watching the games, and it's my job. And I was getting fed up. There was just too much going on. All of a sudden, the season's ended. There's been a slight break, very short break. What's come through is the Olympic Games with no real build-up, George. No real publicity, because the publicity was still going on sport-wise about the football right up until maybe 5-6 weeks ago. Then the Euros took over, which is, you know, very unusual to have the Euros going at more or less the same time of the Olympics. So it was the football's coming home. Everything was centered around football. And I think that's where the Olympics went missing. Yes, I agree with the stations. There only used to be a couple of stations, but I think too much was going on football-wise, which has taken an enormous amount of interest in this country with people. Too much was going on with the Premier League, with the games going on in the Premier League, 3 games a day in some cases, 6 o'clock kickoff, 8 o'clock kickoff, 10 o'clock kickoff. It was madness. And then we went straight from that into the Euros. And I think people have gone, hold on a minute, I need a rest from sport. And the
not me, I'm dying for the season to start, Barry.
Yeah, but that's football, George.
That's different.
That's football. Yeah, and I think that the media coverage just never got there.
Never took off, no. It
was centered around football. And then before we knew where we were, the Olympics were on top of us. And I know 2, I won't name them, 2 chairmen, when I said to them a few weeks ago, are you going to watch the Olympic Games? And both of them, in different ways of saying it, so why is it on?
Yeah.
They didn't even know. I swear they didn't even know. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, I felt that way myself. One other difference amongst many is that there's no audience in the stadium. Japan is exceedingly nervous about the Olympic Games being there. Most Japanese people wanted them postponed again for a second time. If football's nothing without the fans, although I actually quite enjoyed it, whether the fans were there or not, but that's the cliche. Maybe it's the same for athletics.
Yeah, George, I've got to say, I'm not disagreeing with you. A big part of athletics is the atmosphere. We know it's the same with football. So when you play football, when there's no atmosphere, it gets a bit like a training game. I believe a lot of football results this year would never have gone that way had there been a crowd there. But there wasn't. And I think athletes is the same. There's no crowd. There's no atmosphere. But what's really strange, George, is all the athletes are mixing together. You know, when you get 15 athletes racing together, all in the dressing rooms, they're all together.
And they're hugging each other when they win.
They're waiting till they're out of sight, George.
Yeah, I mean, they're not allowed to fraternize in the Olympic Village in the way that allegedly they did in the past. I'll tell you one thing, another thing that's different. I know this because I read 1,600 words in the New York Times this morning telling us that winning a lot of medals at the Olympic Games doesn't matter anymore. That's because America, which used to dominate the medals table, no longer does. Who is dominating it? I've not watched it, so I mean,
You've got
who's
a bit of
doing
everyone,
well?
George.
How is Britain doing?
Yeah, we're lying 6th in the gold medal table at the minute.
Well, that's not bad.
Which is not bad, but there's no real athletes yet. It's been the swimmers and the dancers and jumping up and down. It's been everything really by the athletes. My whole scene when I loved athletics was the running. It wasn't about, for me anyway, it wasn't about the swimming and the rowing and
the skateboarding.
It wasn't about all that. For me, it was about the athletes, the running, 100 meters, 200 meters, 400 meters. I think we're going to...
The mile, the relay.
Yes, what it was, George. Yeah, 4x100, 4x200, 4x440. I don't think we're going to be winning any of them, but we are lying 6. I think we've got up until tonight about 10 gold medals, which is not bad. But then go and name them, George.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, I bet if I'd have said to you it's 10 gold medal at this time, you'd have named 6 of them at least.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even name one now that's taken part, let alone that's won a gold medal, which is quite a sad indictment, I think, of the way these games are, the publicity they've received, which is almost zero. And I think America, I think that in a way, they're saying they don't matter. I think it's because they haven't received the publicity that they would normally have received. And I think what they're saying is, well, it's not as big as usual. Yes, I agree with you. They're not winning the golds, but they normally didn't win the golds till they got to the running anyway. But they're not even winning that at the minute. It's just a real strange Olympic Games.
Strange atmosphere.
A lot of things have been strange. I mean, George, I went to a few football matches. It was the strangest thing I've ever known, to sit there. No one was near me. I mean, you're looking around and thinking, am I actually at a game? Or am I a training game? Because it reminded me of when I used to go to training games, reminded me when Terry Venables a lot. He used to play a lot of his games on the Crystal Palace football pitch and on Queen's Park Rangers football pitch. He was a great believer of using the pitch as much as you can when you were playing a first team versus reserves. And that was played obviously with no one there. These games are very similar. I went to 2 games and it was like being back to when I was a player, when you were playing against your reserve team on a Thursday morning in a 30-minute each way game. Very strange, George. And the Olympics has taken on a very similar handle. And it's not great, is it? Really, it's
no. Otherwise, our conversation would have been different. As you've mentioned, the actual real game. Is Harry Kane going to City?
In football, nothing surprises you. Yeah, there is nothing surprises you. That would really surprise me if he went there.
Oh yeah.
I'd be surprised if they bought him. The reason being, they'd have to change the way they play. I've looked at all Pep Guardiola's teams, and the one thing he has, the striker, is always very, very quick over 10 or 15 yards. He had Aguero, he's got Jesus. He loves quick players. The one thing Harry Kane hasn't got is any pace over 15 yards. Therefore, if they bought him, 2 things would have to, either one of these 2 things would have to happen. One, he would have to change the way that he played, the system they play. 2, the biggest change would be he would have to play with another player up front with him. So they'd go back to how it was when I used to play the game where there was 2 strikers. They would have to go back to that because he doesn't suit Kevin De Bruyne. He doesn't suit Mahrez. He doesn't suit those type of players because they all like playing little balls behind defenders for the striker to spin and get onto. That's not what Harry Kane's game is. So if they buy him, listen, I think Harry Kane's a brilliant striker. Don't get me wrong.
Me too.
But it's horses for courses, isn't it? It's like, I've had racehorses all my life. Certain jockeys are brilliant over 5 furlongs. They're not so clever in 1.5 mile races. And I look at Harry Kane, the way that Tottenham play, they've built their whole team around him the last 4 or 5 years. Everything's been built around Harry Kane. That wouldn't happen at Man City. And I think if they did buy him, I don't think he would be I know it sounds ridiculous because he'd be in a far better team, I don't think he'd be the same player as he's been at Tottenham. And also, he's the star at Tottenham. He won't be the star at Manchester City, far from it. So sometimes you think, well, is this a good move? My own opinion, I say nothing surprises me in football, but I don't think, and I can't see Man City buying him.
Always consult the Oracle. I just have. Barry Silkman, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let's go to the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
A Belarusian Olympic athlete has been taken to the airport in Tokyo to fly home after publicly complaining about the national team. Kristina Timinskaya was due to compete in the women's 200 metres event on Monday, but after posting a video complaining about being entered into another race at short notice, she says she was told to pack and taken to the airport. She has now called on the International Olympic Committee to intervene. Quote, "They are trying to get me out of the country without my permission," she said in a video posted to the Telegram channel of the Belarusian Sports Solidarity Foundation, a group that supports athletes jailed or sidelined for their political views. In a short statement, the Olympic Committee said it had seen media reports about the sprinter and had asked Belarus's National Olympic Committee for clarification. It appears that the flight has taken off without the sprinter on board. She is now with police at Tokyo's Hadina Airport. Taliban rockets struck Kandahar airport in Afghanistan overnight as clashes continue to intensify in the region following the withdrawal of Western forces. A spokesperson for the insurgent group alleged that at least 3 of its missiles had hit the airport in southern Afghanistan on Sunday in an attempt to thwart airstrikes conducted by Afghan government forces. Afghan government officials said the attacks forced authorities to suspend all flights due to damage to the runway, but there were no casualties. The Taliban sees the airport as a major strategic point which, if occupied, would present the group with a better chance of successfully taking over other provinces. Clashes between Afghan forces and the Taliban have intensified in recent days, particularly in the city of Kandahar and Helmand province. Tourists staying at the Turkish holiday resort of Bodrum were evacuated and told to wait for rescue boats on Sunday evening as fresh wildfires erupted nearby. Panicked holidaymakers reportedly rushed to the seashore following the evacuation of several hotels in the coastal city. Fires across Turkey have been raging since Wednesday, burning down forests and some settlements and encroaching on villages and tourist destinations. Satellite images show smoke billowing across huge areas of land. The United States will not return to a COVID lockdown, but things are going to get worse, the top medical advisor says. Dr. Anthony Fauci, America's chief medical advisor, says he does not expect the US to return to lockdowns, but he warned things are going to get worse as the Delta variant continues to spread across the country. He said, quote, "I think we have enough of the percentage of people in the country, not enough to crush the outbreak, but I believe it's enough to not allow us to get into the situation we were in last winter." He added, "We have 100 million people in this country who are eligible to being vaccinated, but who are not getting the vaccine." In Britain, young people will be offered discounted takeaways and taxi rides to get their COVID jabs in a bid to boost vaccine uptake, the government has said. Food delivery and taxi hailing firms, including Uber, Bolt, Deliveroo and Pizza Pilgrims, will offer incentives to people to get vaccinated. The Department of Health said details on more partnerships would be released in due course. Britain's airline bosses have heaped pressure on the government to add more countries to the green travel list. The directors of the UK's biggest airlines are urging the Transport Secretary to add more countries to the green list this week and reduce the burden of testing requirements. The 8 industry figures from British Airways, Ryanair and other firms say green status should, quote, increasingly become a default due to the vaccine rollout in many of our key markets. In a letter to Grant Shapps, they wrote, "On this basis, there is no reason why, and it is essential, that much of Europe, including the key volume markets, the US, Caribbean and other major markets, cannot return to green next week in time for the remainder of the summer peak." Vaccine manufacturers Pfizer and Moderna are planning to raise prices in the EU, it's claimed. According to the Financial Times, Pfizer and Moderna have both increased the prices of their coronavirus vaccines in the latest European Union supply contracts. The new price for the Pfizer jab is now said to be €19.50. That's around £16.50 compared to €15.50 before, which is more around £13. The Moderna vaccine has gone from €19, £16 to £25.50. That's around £21.75 per dose, the newspaper reported. YouTube has barred Sky News Australia from uploading new content for a week, saying it had breached rules on COVID-19 misinformation. It issued a strike under its 3-strike policy, the last of which means permanent removal. YouTube did not point to specific items, but said it opposed material that could cause real-world harm. The TV channel's digital editor said the decision was a disturbing attack on the ability to think freely. A YouTube statement said it had clear and established COVID-19 medical misinformation policies based on local and global health authority guidance. A spokesperson said it did not allow content that denies the existence of COVID-19 or which encouraged people to use hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin to treat or prevent the virus. Neither has been proven to be effective against COVID-19. And finally, social media is full of people with big mouths, but one star on TikTok has just proved that hers is quite literally the largest. Guinness World Records confirmed that Samantha Ramsdale from Connecticut in the United States is the record holder for the world's largest mouth gape for a female. The gape, that is the measurement of the open mouth from top to bottom, is 6.56 centimetres or about 2.5 inches. When measured across, it reaches more than 10 centimetres or 4 inches. Ramsdale said she has always known she has a big mouth, but it wasn't until the children of TikTok pointed out that she may have a record-sized mouth that she was encouraged to go for the record. Quote, "I never thought it would be possible to be this famous off my mouth," she said. Her videos include one of her stuffing 3 donuts into her mouth. She can also fit in a large order of fries. Ramsdale said she was bullied growing up for her mouth size. Now, at age 31, she embraces her unique feature for her 1.7 million TikTok followers. "It's your superpower," she said. "It's the one thing that makes you unique and special. Everyone should be celebrating what makes them different." Ramsdale hopes that her record-breaking attribute will one day lead her to landing a TV show, but I suppose Jaws is already spoken for. That's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Well, we're taking your calls now on any of the subjects we've talked about this evening. Israel, Iran, the Olympic Games, and the subject we're about to address, the extremely important subject of China. China is subject to a kind of orchestra. It's orchestrated, and the conductor is not hard to identify. And that orchestra, like any orchestra, has different sections. A string section, a brass section, percussion section, and so on. And one section is brought in as the conductor decides. Everything from Tibet to the Falun Gong to the Uyghur situation, the situation of Chinese Muslims as a whole, China's role in Africa, Taiwan, Huawei. One section after another is brought in by the conductors, hoping to build this crescendo of hatred against China. Why? Well, China is breathing down the necks of the United States. It's the second biggest economy in the world. It's the biggest country in the world in terms of population. It has the brightest economic future in the world. That's why my children, although very small, are all going to Chinese school. Because by the time they grow up and enter the labor market, a good knowledge of Chinese will be much more valuable than a new knowledge of Latin. I see that the British government has reverted to type on that. China is the victim of multiple calumnies, mainly generated by the very same engine rooms that brought us the calumnies that preceded the invasion and occupation of Iraq, the invasion and occupation of Libya, the invasion and occupation of Syria, the war against Yemen, and so on and so on. But there's a difference. China is in a position to answer back. They have their own television platform, CGTN, which broadcasts in English and has an increasingly ready audience all over the world, nearly as big as the audience of the mother of all talk shows. And that's why I'm particularly happy to welcome JingJing, who's a journalist and broadcaster on that very same broadcaster, CGTN. Very nice to meet you, Madame. I've followed your work for a long time. Let's start with what I just said by way of introduction. Do you agree with me that these stories, I call them calumnies, these slanders against China are not organic? They don't emerge out of nowhere. They are deliberately generated by people who want to slow China down at least and help to break China up at worst.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But first, thanks for having me, George. I've been following your work for a while as well, so I'm really glad to be here. So first, we've been hearing all kinds of horrendous claims about China made by the West, either it's about Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Tibet, COVID. So, and all this, but if you actually talk to those people who actually been to those regions, for example, Xinjiang, if you talk to people who actually been to Xinjiang, either diplomats, expats, local Chinese, Uyghurs, students, you will hear different stories. Many people who made those allegations on Western mainstream media, they are either never been to Xinjiang or they went there but distorted the facts. Okay, so one of the major allegations that being talked about recently is about they're saying China is committing genocide towards Uyghurs in Xinjiang, which is far from the truth. I, as a journalist that actually visited Xinjiang many times over the past few years, witnessed the changes of Xinjiang. I went there not just for work, also for my personal vacations, and also I conducted thorough interviews with lots of Uyghurs, locals, and also people of different ethnic groups. And they come from all walks of life. Some of them Islamic religious leaders, some imams, some are farmers, some are artists. They tell me completely different stories from what you normally hear on Western mainstream media. For example, the genocide. I can give you some data. According to the latest and also the 7th National Demographic Census, the population of Uyghurs in Xinjiang grew by 1.8 million. The growth rate is 18.52%. Higher than all other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang, and also higher than the national average. And also, the life expectancy of people in Xinjiang grew from 30 in the year 1949 to 72 now. So I don't know which genocide in the world that actually boosts the population of a certain ethnic group. and not just boosting the population. Actually, Uyghurs and all the other ethnic minorities in China have many privileges to get better education, to get better employment. For example, kids of all ethnic minorities in China can gain this extra points for college entrance exam, which is a pretty fierce competitive exam in China. Every year, millions of Chinese kids took in this exam trying to go to college. So a few points can make a big difference. And all the kids from different ethnic groups can get a few points to dozens of points based on the population of their ethnic group. And a few months ago, I interviewed a Uyghur influencer. Her name is Sabila. She told me she actually gained 30 points when she took the college entrance exam. That is a lot. That's the difference of one can go to university or not, or go to a mediocre university or top university. So many Chinese kids would kill to get that many extra points. And all the companies, the local governments in China are also encouraged to hire ethnic minorities. So again, I don't know which genocide in the world actually boosts the population.
I have quizzed people on this. They use the word genocide to imply a killing, slaughter, the wiping out of a population, and there are many fools who are fooled by that. But when you get them in an interview, they quickly have to acknowledge that, well, China isn't actually killing these people at all. By genocide, we mean, they then say, though, of course, their implication was completely otherwise, by genocide, we mean the destruction of their way of life, particularly their Islamic way of life. What would you say to that?
Okay, so let's talk about it culturally. About the Islamic, the Muslims. First, I need to make it clear, not all Uyghurs are Muslims. Not all Muslims are Uyghurs. Actually, there are over 10 different ethnic groups in China Muslims, and some Uyghurs chose not to be Muslims. So the religious group are not necessarily connected with ethnic groups. And about the freedom of Muslims in China. Currently, there are 35,000 mosques across China. And in Xinjiang alone, there are 24,000. And there are several in China, just in Beijing, the city that I'm living in right now. And actually, just a few months ago, I was invited to visit several mosques in Mongolia and in Xinjiang. And even though I'm a woman and I'm not a Muslim, the imam showed me the greatest kindness and hospitality because they're very nice and peaceful people. They welcome non-believers to come in to get to know about them. So they allowed me to visit their 5 prayers a day, show me what time they do the 5 prayers and what Islam is really about. And in that city is called Bayanur, a small city in the Mongolia. In that small city alone, there are 44 mosques. And it's funny, actually, the funny part of the conversation, the imam of that mosque, when I asked them, well, a lot of people in the West are saying you guys are being oppressed. You guys don't have the religious freedom. What do you say? And the imam laughed. And he said, do you think the Americans really care about us Muslims? They created and founded terrorists. And when they don't listen to them, they label them as terrorists. So he, as a Muslim, as an imam, thinks these allegations from the West towards them is totally absurd. And not only that, like Islamic people, he, as a leader of this mosque, he constantly meets religious leaders from other religions like Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity. They constantly sit down with each other to understand each other and also organize charity works to help the citizens, to help the people in poverty. So the reality in China is not only those people have religious freedom, they coexist with each other quite harmoniously. And that's for the Muslims. And also some people are saying there are cultural genocide, right? So there are also Uyghurs that are not Muslims. Let's talk about how their lives are like. It's because I saw some of those allegations from those people. Some are saying the Uyghurs, the Muslims, are forced to eat pork. There are no halal restaurants, which is totally a lie. Because I cannot count how many halal restaurants are here in Beijing, in Xinjiang, everywhere. And there's a halal restaurant right in our office buildings. There are several halal restaurants in our campuses in different schools. So it's totally a lie. And also some people are saying Uyghurs are not allowed to say their language. They are not allowed to use their language. That, I think, that doesn't even need me to debunk. Anyone with well-functioned ears and eyes, they will see Uyghur language being written, being said by local people. All the road signs, all the public signs or name of restaurant are required, in Xinjiang are required to be written in two languages. One is the language of the local minorities. The other is Mandarin, the national language. It's required by the law. And actually in those autonomous regions, it is required by the law that the minorities language needs to be above the national language, Mandarin. And if you go to schools in Xinjiang, in Tibet, you will see Uyghur language classes. You will see Tibetan language classes. Uyghurs are speaking their language to each other all the time. So,
well, what they're referring to really is a conflict between the Chinese state and the Al-Qaeda franchise in that province that used to be proscribed in Britain and the United States as a terrorist organization, but which is no longer on our list of terrorist organizations, even though these Al-Qaeda Uyghurs have been found in their thousands fighting in Syria, in Libya, even recently in Nagorno-Karabakh, in the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. They have quite obviously committed terrorist acts in China. They're on video. Their aftermath is on video. That's who China is fighting, not the Muslims, not the Uyghurs.
The extremists. Yeah.
They are the kind of fanatics that we fight here, although sometimes we encourage them in other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So the issue that in Xinjiang, that the real issue was the terrorist attacks conducted by the group that you just mentioned, ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement. They, since the 1980s, late 1980s to early 1990s, until 2014, 2015, around that time, there were about thousands of terrorist attacks happened in Xinjiang, across Xinjiang, in different scales. Among them, several are widely known. For example, the July the 5th terrorist attacks in Urumqi led to hundreds of people killed, thousands of people injured. And those people were not just Han people, they killed Uyghurs as well, people of other ethnic groups as well. And those attacks are not just happening in Xinjiang. It spread it to other parts of China and other parts of the world. Another famous one was in 2014. They conducted this massacre at the Kunming railway station, killing people regardless of their ethnic backgrounds, their age, their gender. So that terrorist group is responsible for thousands of terrorist attacks inside of China, outside of China. They are responsible for all those lies. Actually, that group was that terrorist group was recognized, listed by the United Nations, and also listed by George W. Bush. But Mike Pompeo delisted, which I think basically reveals the hypocrisy of American politicians. They will list those people as terrorist groups when they think they can use can help China to join to fight this terrorism, and they would delist the terrorist organization when they think they can use it to continue to push these narratives in Xinjiang. So it's totally...
We kill such people on London Bridge, quite rightly, when they have killed other people. We kill them by drones where we can find them. We say we're committed to wiping them out on the battlefield. That's what we do. And when we capture them alive, we put them in the dungeon. We put them in Belmarsh maximum security prison. The two beasts who slaughtered in broad daylight a young British bandsman outside his barracks in South London. We jail them for 100 years. They will never see the light of day again. That's what we do. What does China do in its fight against these terrorists?
The Western politicians and some Western media are constantly using the term concentration camps, which is far from the truth. China admitted there are vocational training centers for those extremists. That's vocational training centers, not concentration camps, because they provide professional skills training, de-radicalization courses, and also give them better educations. So I actually interviewed several former trainees of those vocational training centers, and there were women. The two female trainees, when I asked them, BBC is saying that you guys are being systematically raped in those centers. Is that true? You can feel they're totally outrageous at this allegation, because not only none of the torture or rape happened in those centers, they actually formed a very close connections with the teachers, with the staff there, because they are not just helping them in the school, they also help them outside of the school. So until very recently, in the recent 4 to 5 years, there were no terrorist attacks happen at all in China. I think that proves that's a pretty effective way of de-radicalization. And what those centers that provide those people are professional skills, because after analyzing the reason that led to the extremist thoughts, one is definitely because of the terrorist group's influence. They taught the locals what they're teaching them are not the proper Islam. And also some of the people were being manipulated because they didn't have many material sources. They didn't have many educations. So they're easily manipulated. So what China did is lift those people out of poverty, teach them more skills. Those women learned skills like how to use computers, how to speak the national language, so they have more work opportunities. They now, after graduation, some of them are working at this women committee. Some working have their own plots of land, started their own businesses. So lift those people out of poverty, give them material sources, and also de-radicalization. So you don't need to kill those people. You can actually improve their living standards. Well,
now we don't have all night, of course, unfortunately. So let me go to a quite different subject. It might be beyond your purview, but certainly long before you were born, the Royal Navy sent a ship up the Yangtze, which the Red Navy in 1949 sank. It became quite an incident. It was called the Yangtze Incident. It was regarded as extraordinarily bold of the Chinese to sink a British warship because, of course, we were used to sending our warships to bombard China without reply. Now, for some reason that none of us can fathom, our prize naval asset has been dispatched, bristling with weapons, into the South China Sea, the clue being in the name. What's going to happen? How is China going to react to this provocative display of NATO military assets in Chinese waters?
I think I cannot say on behalf of the military or the government here because I'm not working for the government, I'm not working for the military. I don't know what their reactions will be. But as an ordinary Chinese, I think Chinese people or Chinese government will no longer be bullied. British history in China is not, how to say, it's quite humiliating for a lot of Chinese. I'm sorry, can you see my image?
Don't worry, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, something with the camera, sorry. The cameraman trying to fix it. But for example, not just the South China Sea. We all know about the history in Hong Kong, how Britain took it as its colony. And it's a humiliation for Chinese, even though 100 years passed. And also in Tibet, many people also didn't know about this fact that actually Britain invaded Tibet twice in the late 18th century and early 19th. They killed a lot of Tibetans, thousands of Tibetans, recognized Tibet as part of China because they want Qing dynasty to pay the compensation for their soldiers died on the way killing Tibetans. So Britain had a lot of history invading the territories of China in Hong Kong, in Tibet, and Chinese nowadays will no longer allow it to happen again.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I hope this can be a regular thing because there is so much. To continue the nautical metaphor, there is a tidal wave of anti-China propaganda in Western countries, and it is good to get someone who can succinctly and well answer some of the calumnies. A counter orchestra, you may say, an orchestra that I'd be very happy to help conduct. Thank you very much for joining us, Li JingJing.
Thank you.
On the mother
Thank you, George.
of all talk shows. And here's my next question. It is, in 1964, the bodies of 3 murdered American civil rights workers were found in Mississippi. What was the film based on the FBI inquiry called? A, Deadly Intent, B, Murder Alley, C, Mississippi Burning. Answer after the break.
This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system. Announcing the commencement of your weekly programming sanctioned by the mother of all talk shows. Support for the working class has been authorized for use during this program. All free speech is non-restricted. Moats Legends of Ranking 10 have been granted straight-to-air status and shall not be harmed. Commencing at the siren, any and all free thinking, including socialism, will be legal for 3 continuous hours. Political incompetence, bigotry, and emergency medical personnel at Ward 5 will be unavailable until the program concludes. Blessed be our glorious teacher and mother of all talk shows. A University of the Airwaves reborn. Release George Galloway. May God be with you all.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
The film was Mississippi Burning, of course, one of the best films ever made. If you haven't watched it, you really should make the effort to do so. How many children does Boris Johnson actually have? 17% of you are silly enough to think it's the declared 6. 28% of you think it's 7. And 55% of you think it is 8. And I'm counting that as 8 or more. You can still vote up until 9 o'clock on my Twitter feed. Okay, here's the phone numbers. If you are in the UK, 08081 965522. 08081 965522. If you're in the United States, it's +1 844 944 3344. And it's entirely free. You can email the show anytime. On air at moats.tv. So, let me do some social media. There's an awful lot coming in. Sammy says on the Boris Johnson thing, as long as the children know each other, it shouldn't be a problem. It only becomes a problem if they start breeding with each other. And Scouser Lar says, I doubt Johnson himself even knows. And Belligerent says, as many children as Alex Salmond has restraining orders. And Pablo says, must be costing Boris a lot. Indeed, and that's where public overlaps into private. And Marek says, I'll make no bones that I'd prefer if he was more straight about his children, like yourself or Jacob Rees-Mogg, who also has 6. An email from Chris Conway, can I comment on Craig Murray's jail sentence? I have, of course, done that. Tom Orr says, it's a mystery who would have attacked a ship in the Persian Gulf. Whoever it was should be careful. By blaming Iran with no evidence, could even start a war. I was just reading about the USS Liberty, says Tom. Talk about déjà vu. Déjà vu all over again, Tom. Okay, let's hear from Jamie in Malaga on Craig Murray. Go ahead, Jamie.
Good evening, George. Thank you for taking my call.
Anytime, go ahead.
Lovely to be on your show. Firstly, if I could just say that it was really nice to listen to you talking to JingJing from China.
She was wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, she's brilliant. And I too am disgusted at the provocations being made by the UK and the US against China, and I certainly hope nothing bad comes of it, but it's provocation.
Well, they're counting on Chinese patience. Chinese are extremely patient, but nobody's patient forever.
No, absolutely, and they've got every reason to be angered by the posturing of the UK and the US. I called
and don't
in
forget
to talk
the Netherlands, Jimmy. Part of the flotilla is one frigate from the mighty Navy of the Netherlands. I don't know if it frightens the Chinese, but it sends a shiver down my spine.
Part of the reason I called was to talk about Craig Murray and how saddened and disgusted I am that he's been sent to prison today.
Yeah, he's now lying on a hard floor bed in a cell. Can you believe that?
It's utterly disgraceful. I mean, never would I know a more decent and honourable person.
Me too. Me too. I disagree with him on all kinds of things, but he's a man of the utmost integrity, absolute integrity, personal integrity.
Exactly, and very good of you to say so, despite your difference in opinions at times. The things, I mean, I'll keep it brief because I know you've mentioned them already, and again, I'm a fan of Afshin Rattansi, who's really brilliant in his reporting. But Craig Murray and Daniel Hale, both imprisoned. Obviously, Julian Assange still sat in solitary confinement, still, despite winning his case back in January. And it's just abominable, and the sort of the agenda of both judges in the case of Julian Assange in September last year with Judge Baretza and then Lady Dorian in the Scottish judge, it seems that they want to try and separate a distinction between mainstream media, who are self-regulated and beyond prosecution, and independent journalists such as Craig Murray, possibly yourself, and Julian Assange, who are exposed and potentially, with what Priti Patel is proposing at the moment, could be sentenced to 14 years in prison for publishing embarrassing documents. I mean, where is this taking us, George?
Well, if there's anything more repugnant than the government's intentions in these matters, it is the cowardly, idiotic silence of their fellow journalists and broadcasters, working on the assumption that if you feed the alligators, they might be fooled by the time it comes to you. More fool them. Jamie, thanks for that call. Tony is in Cardiff on Boris Johnson. Go ahead, Tony.
Good evening, George.
Good evening to you. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm curious to find out. You mentioned the night about Boris and his children.
Yes.
Was it 8 children? And how he's going to cope with only £150,000 salary with all his alimony. Yes. Where do you think all this payment are going to come from? You know, I mean,
Well, that's why I justify bringing the subject up, Tony, because I know how expensive alimony is. I know that Boris Johnson will be very hard pressed, paying for 8 children and at least 2, maybe 3 former wives, and I know you can't do that on 150,000 after tax. That means either that he has to step down and go and make vastly more money in the private sector, or he is open to being corrupted by rich men who want something. And I think that is a justifiable public interest in this story. Tony?
Yes. You know, I mean, I get that. That's... I'm just amazed. Do you think his children will be going to Eton on that type of salary?
No, I don't see, unless someone else is paying it. It costs, I think, 30 or 40,000 a year to send your children to Eton.
Yes, where do they get these funds from? It's amazing, isn't it?
It's amazing, but it's also disturbing. No,
it is disturbing. It's because people are making a lot of money out of this COVID off the back of people that are being ill. Have become ill. That's my assessment of it. The other thing,
some of them miraculously.
Sorry?
Some of them miraculously, coincidentally, turn out to be bosom buddies of Conservative politicians.
Oh yeah, you mean Serco? Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I agree with you entirely. You know, I mean, I think Serco has 75% of the government contracts, somewhere around that.
I don't know, but they've got plenty. That contract,
it's run by an old Etonian.
That contract, at least, you could argue about. The publican, Hancock's publican, getting a £23 million contract to supply something he's never traded in his puff, ought to put Hancock on trial, if you ask me.
Well, I agree with you there, because what amazes me is, right, he comes out that he's being taken photographs and embraced with his mistress. Poor old Boris never knew about that, because one of the best security services in the world. I wonder what he lost by that, Boris, by one of his buddy pals. You know, I mean, it's got to be behind the scenes with this lot. I wonder how much it cost him. More likely, his children can't go to Eton. Anyhow, there you go. I also want to ask about Epstein.
Oh, yes. Yes, go ahead.
Epstein, do you think he is... do you think he committed I've asked you, Chris. Do you think he committed suicide? He's still alive.
No, I think
I think he's still alive.
I think Jeffrey Epstein's suicide came as a great surprise to him. But I don't believe he's still alive, no.
No?
No.
You wouldn't have thought that?
I believe someone killed him.
Oh, what, because of what he knew and all that? And
Yes, you can't count, you see, and this is where Miss Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell, is in such a difficult situation now. Those with most to lose are very loath to trust that those who could incriminate them will remain stum when the possibility of trading what they know for a shorter sentence appears on the table.
Yes, but being as he, which in my opinion, he's part of the Mossad group, do you think they'd sell their own down the river?
Well, Robert Maxwell was, in my opinion, killed off the back of his boat. I believe he was pulled into the water. I believe that he had a rendezvous at that point and was talking to someone in another craft off the back of the boat and was pulled into it. Either that or he stumbled and fell. I certainly don't believe he committed suicide. But he was rewarded with a full dress, super state funeral on the Mount of Olives.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Can I ask another question? Could you think Hefner was involved in the same type of thing, this honey trap?
Hefner?
To control the media and Hollywood and that.
Who's Hefner?
Hugh Hefner.
Who's he?
Playboy.
Oh, my goodness. I know nothing.
You go back,
I know
think
nothing.
about it.
I know nothing about Playboy or
No, I know
Hugh
what I'm
Hefner.
saying is...
All right.
Yeah,
thanks, Tony.
Do you think he was running a honey
I
trap
don't know.
as well?
I've never heard of him. I've never heard of him, so I couldn't have a view on that. Maybe other listeners and viewers will. Tony, thanks for that call. I've got to take a break and ask you this question. In 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead of a drug overdose. Who was she intending to marry? Intending to marry. A, Frank Sinatra. B, Joe DiMaggio. C, Arthur Miller. Answer after this.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, Marilyn Monroe was in fact intending to marry Joe DiMaggio, but for the second time, because she had, of course, previously been married to him. Now, one of the most melancholy, if slightly tragicomic videos I've seen in a long time was the sting of Piers Corbyn, the campaigner against all things vax, all things COVID, man who's been multiply arrested, a man who lives, I can testify, an almost monkish life, a man with no interest in avarice, a man with no interest in worldly things. He was captured by fake outfit claiming to be acting on behalf of a man living high on the proceeds of his AstraZeneca shares. He was lured to a picnic table in a park somewhere, it looked like. He was shown 10,000 real pounds, and he was asked if in return for those 10,000 real pounds, would he be prepared to leave AstraZeneca out of his discourse and maybe focus more on Pfizer and Moderna. To my absolute astonishment, if only at the stupidity involved, Piers Corbyn is recorded as saying yes, he would, and showing actually rather an unseemly interest in the money. Then one of the pranksters lured him into a selfie, a comely young woman, always a mistake. And while he was posing for the selfie, the real £10,000 notes were exchanged for Monopoly money, and the film then plastered all over the ether. As Oscar Wilde said on the death scene in Charles Dickens' book Little Nell, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to laugh. And a lot of people are laughing. But we're asking, I see, in this second poll, how much money would it take for you to sell out your principles? A, £10,000, B, £1 million, C, what principles? You can vote on my Twitter feed. Cruel, I think this poll is, but hey, as I say, you'd need a heart of stone not to laugh. Here's Wayne in Cheshire. He disagrees with me on the birth rate. That's why he's on screen now. Go ahead, Wayne.
Always a pleasure, George. I have to completely disagree with what you said about the birth rate. Basically, you're calculating your need for population increase on a failed capitalist system to pay for our old age and jobs. But more importantly... Is
there another system coming along in a minute that I don't know about?
Well, let me just finish on this one. We need population decrease until we have population numbers at a level of equilibrium to Earth's climate and resources, and only then increase when the species is safe to do so.
Well, first of all, how would we bring about that population decrease?
If I was in government, and the truth is, I would ask people only to have one child in most circumstances.
Okay.
Because there is too many people on the earth for the system that's in place.
There's not too many people in Britain. The whole population could stand shoulder to shoulder on the Isle of Wight.
No, I did say to the system that's in place, which obviously I'm sure you agree with climate change, and that's what's causing it.
Too many people. There was a man like you called Malthus, wasn't there?
No, you changed what I said.
There was a man like you called the Reverend Thomas Malthus.
No, you're not letting me speak. What I mean by is the system that's in place. There is too many people because our resources, and we're very greedy species. We like cars, we like loads of kids, we like junk food, all the rest of it. If we had a better system, then I would agree with you. But at the moment, the system is crap, so we need less people.
And we're going to do that by asking people only to have one child. What if they answer in the negative and say, stuff you, Wayne in Cheshire, we'll have as many children as we like? What do you do then?
Well, as was found with the injections and the COVID and everything, people, I believe, around the world are quite easily manipulated. And you've given the facts of things, I believe they'll change.
So you're against them being manipulated on COVID, but in favour of manipulating them on family size?
No, that was just an example of how the government manipulates society.
All right. Let me ask you then my second question. how are we going to sustain a prosperous standard of living if our population is increasingly elderly and not working, but we are not being replaced by productive workers?
My theory is that when that comes to play, which it will in this capitalist system, it will force society to embrace in a new system which can cope.
Well, I've heard some cockamamie definitions of communism in my life, but you, Wayne in Cheshire, take the biscuit. This Malthusian disaster communism that you favour is frankly risible. So risible, I'm passing on to Larry in Georgia. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, top of the day for you guys. Thank y'all so much for having me on.
You're welcome.
I listen to your show, and I like your position and your stance. But I will say that there, in my opinion now, and it's only my opinion, I'm the type of individual that it's never okay to offend anybody unless they need offending. And if they need offending, they only get offended because they know they're wrong and they don't agree.
Okay,
right
go ahead and offend us, as long as you don't swear on air.
I got you. Well, it's not y'all that I think it's a little naive, because the human population of this planet, we're failing. All right, it's bottom line. You take a dog and its character qualities. It's loyal, it's faithful. It doesn't matter whether you live under a bridge or whether you live in a mansion. It's loyal. How many humans can say that they can meet that standard?
Not many. It
will lay down its life for its master should that need arise without hesitation. How many people on this planet are of that mindset? Now, with that being said, I'm going to bring y'all's attention to something in 1980 called the Georgia Guidestones. We had a man by the name of C.R. Christian. It was an alias, Christianity, and he went down there to Elberton, Georgia. He wanted to raise these monolithic, like Stonehenge, granite monuments that would withstand catastrophic events. And they thought it was crazy, so they gave him a price 3 times the cost, thinking it would deter him. He went out to his car and got cash and paid for it, vis-a-vis the alias name and the cash, non-traceable. The inscription on the very first line of that stone, Georgia Guidestones, maintain the human population at 500 million. We're about 7.1 billion over that. So how are we going to get down to that? And then when you look at Biden and that report that he's given people in his under his control, I guess would be a good way to say it, the instructions to wage war on overpopulation. Now you look at COVID and you look at Fauci and the lies that coward's saying, and one thing about the truth, it never changes, and it's easily remembered because the truth never changes. And they talked about the tampering with of this virus so that it would jump to humanity, and you look at what it's really attacking, the people who have underlying conditions, the elderly, and the youth too. But in the beginning, they were saying children didn't have a problem with that. Now you factor in Trump. Everybody loved Trump. I liked what he was doing as far as rattling the cage, saying we're going to stand for America, but it's about time for America and the whole entire planet to get their heads out of their proverbial rectums and realize that we're all in this together, every single one of us. Never before in my lifetime, in the history of my life, have I ever known an event where the whole entire planet was united under one threat. Each one of y'all and the people that are listening in the audience would do well to remember the feelings of fear and dread for our children, our loved ones, and as men, well, that's not a problem. We'll grab it by the horns and we'll live till we die. And when we die, we'll die with honor, dignity, and respect, doing our job. But it was the ones that we care about the most. Your children, I don't want nothing to happen to them. Your mom and dad, I don't want nothing to happen to them. The elderly, they've already lived their whole lives and having to choose now between power and Social Security. Now, where's the logic? I'm going to jump for a second, but where is the logic in having nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare laboratories on this planet? I want to say this, and I hope it gets out. Every single one of you world leaders, y'all are cowards. My name's Larry Harvey, and I live in Georgia, and I'm not hard to find. And I will gladly sit down with you face to face anytime you get ready, and I will prove to you that not only are you ignorant, but you're cowards because you're not willing to sit down and do what it takes to bring world peace. And let's get to the brass tacks of dealing with overpopulation, not destroying our planet because it's not like we can produce another one somewhere.
I have to take a break from Apocalypse Now because I've got to go to the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
A Belarusian Olympic athlete has been taken to the airport in Tokyo to fly home after publicly complaining about the national team. Kristina Timinskaya was due to compete in the women's 200 metres event on Monday, but after posting a video complaining about being entered into another race at short notice, she says she was told to pack and taken to the airport. She's now called on the International Olympic Committee to intervene. Quote, "They are trying to get me out of the country without my permission," she said in a video posted to the Telegram channel of the Belarusian Sports Solidarity Foundation, a group that supports athletes jailed or sidelined for their political views. In a short statement, the Olympic Committee said it had seen media reports about the sprinter and had asked Belarus's National Olympic Committee for clarification. It appears that the flight has taken off without the sprinter on board. She is now with police at Tokyo's Hadina Airport. Taliban rockets struck Kandahar airport in Afghanistan overnight as clashes continue to intensify in the region following the withdrawal of Western forces. A spokesperson for the insurgent group alleged that at least 3 of its missiles had hit the airport in southern Afghanistan on Sunday in an attempt to thwart airstrikes conducted by Afghan government forces. Afghan government officials said the attacks forced authorities to suspend all flights due to damage to the runway, but there were no casualties. The Taliban sees the airport as a major strategic point which, if occupied, would present the group with a better chance of successfully taking over other provinces. Clashes between Afghan forces and the Taliban have intensified in recent days, particularly in the city of Kandahar and Helmand province. Tourists staying at the Turkish holiday resort of Bodrum were evacuated and told to wait for rescue boats on Sunday evening as fresh wildfires erupted nearby. Panicked holidaymakers reportedly rushed to the seashore following the evacuation of several hotels in the coastal city. Fires across Turkey have been raging since Wednesday, burning down forests and some settlements and encroaching on villages and tourist destinations. Satellite images show smoke billowing across huge areas of land. The United States will not return to a COVID lockdown, but things are going to get worse, the top medical advisor says. Dr. Anthony Fauci, America's chief medical advisor, says he does not expect the US to return to lockdowns, but he warned things are going to get worse as the Delta variant continues to spread across the country. He said, quote, "I think we have enough of the percentage of people in the country, not enough to crush the outbreak, but I believe it's enough to not allow us to get into the situation we were in last winter." He added, "We have 100 million people in this country who are eligible to being vaccinated, but who are not getting the vaccine." In Britain, young people will be offered discounted takeaways and taxi rides to get their COVID jabs in a bid to boost vaccine uptake, the government has said. Food delivery and taxi hailing firms, including Uber, Bolt, Deliveroo and Pizza Pilgrims, will offer incentives to people to get vaccinated. The Department of Health said details on more partnerships would be released in due course. Britain's airline bosses have heaped pressure on the government to add more countries to the green travel list. The directors of the UK's biggest airlines are urging the Transport Secretary to add more countries to the green list this week and reduce the burden of testing requirements. The 8 industry figures from British Airways, Ryanair and other firms say green status should, quote, increasingly become a default due to the vaccine rollout in many of our key markets. In a letter to Grant Shapps, they wrote, on this basis, there is no reason why, and it is essential, that much of Europe, including the key volume markets, the US, Caribbean and other major markets, cannot return to green next week in time for the remainder of the summer peak. Vaccine manufacturers Pfizer and Moderna are planning to raise prices in the EU, it's claimed. According to the Financial Times, Pfizer and Moderna have both increased the prices of their coronavirus vaccines in the latest European Union supply contracts. The new price for the Pfizer jab is now said to be €19.50. That's around £16.50 compared to €15.50 before, which is more around £13. The Moderna vaccine has gone from €19, £16 to £25.50. That's around £21.75 per dose, the newspaper reported. YouTube has barred Sky News Australia from uploading new content for a week, saying it had breached rules on COVID-19 misinformation. It issued a strike under its 3-strike policy, the last of which means permanent removal. YouTube did not point to specific items, but said it opposed material that could cause real-world harm. The TV channel's digital editor said the decision was a disturbing attack on the ability to think freely. A YouTube statement said it had clear and established COVID-19 medical misinformation policies based on local and global health authority guidance. A spokesperson said it did not allow content that denies the existence of COVID-19 or which encouraged people to use hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin to treat or prevent the virus. Neither has been proven to be effective against COVID-19. And finally, social media is full of people with big mouths, but one star on TikTok has just proved that hers is quite literally the largest. Guinness World Records confirmed that Samantha Ramsdale from Connecticut in the United States is the record holder for the world's largest mouth gape for a female. The gape, that is the measurement of the open mouth from top to bottom, is 6.56 centimetres or about 2.5 inches. When measured across, it reaches more than 10 centimetres or 4 inches. Ramsdale said she has always known she has a big mouth, but it wasn't until the children of TikTok pointed out that she may have a record-sized mouth that she was encouraged to go for the record. Quote, "I never thought it would be possible to be this famous off my mouth," she said. Her videos include one of her stuffing 3 donuts into her mouth. She can also fit in a large order of fries. Ramsdale said she was bullied growing up for her mouth size. Now, at age 31, she embraces her unique feature for her 1.7 million TikTok followers. "It's your superpower," she said. "It's the one thing that makes you unique and special. Everyone should be celebrating what makes them different." Ramsdale hopes that a record-breaking attribute will one day lead her to landing a TV show, but I suppose Jaws is already spoken for. That's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Groucho Marx famously said, "I have principles. If you don't like them, I have others." This lies behind the poll. How much money would it take for you to sell out your principles? There really ought to have been an option to say never. I, of course, would have ticked that box if I had wanted to sell out my principles. I could have done so for a very, very large price. All the tea in China worth of price. £10,000, that was the money that Piers Corbyn accepted in a brown envelope, except it had been switched while his eyes were on a comely young woman taking a selfie with him for Monopoly money. £1 million 45% of you, nearly half of you, would sell your principles for £1 million. And C, nearly half of you say, what principles? Well, there's much to discuss. I've got so much social media. I'm not going to get through it all, so my apologies if I don't get to yours. I want to cross the Atlantic and talk to my RT America colleague, Rachel Blevins, who joins us now. Rachel, welcome back on the mother of all talk shows. What happened to your flowers? We got used to admiring them every week. Maybe it's in solidarity with the millions of people that this evening now face the risk of eviction. Almost impossible to believe. Please explain what happened.
Well, speaking of selling out on your principles, George, I think that that's exactly what almost every member of Congress is looking at right now. You know, over the last year, they put in a number of policies to try to kind of help out Americans in different ways when it comes to the pandemic. One of those was a federal ban on evictions, and that ban was allowed to expire last night at midnight. Now, the problem here is that there are more than 15 million Americans who are now at risk of being evicted and losing their homes. And this is something that some Democrats in the House tried to bring up this week. We saw some different protests at the Capitol, but top Democrats like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi just kind of shrugged it off. She made it sound like she had only heard about this problem this week alone. Now, of course, whenever it comes to these issues like additional government aid that we've seen over the last year, we've watched Congress kind of pull back on some of those policies, whether it's the extended unemployment benefits and things like that. So, yes, at the end of the day, there does have to be a time when this ban will likely come to an end. But the problem here is that over the last year, even with those additional policies passed by Congress, we've seen more than 7.8 million Americans descend into poverty, as a result of that. So we're seeing a really big issue right now. And the way that Congress responded to it was they just threw up their hands and decided to go on vacation for the next 6 weeks as if it wasn't their problem.
Well, Nancy Pelosi has to get back to her insider trading husband. You can understand why she was not interested, a woman that's gone from being worth 14 million to 140 million during her term of office. But what about all these so-called progressives, the squad? Haven't they been jumping up and down, protesting about this?
We have seen some protests outside of the Capitol, and it's interesting the timing on it because most people are looking at this and saying, look, it's too little too late. Their protests outside of the Capitol building aren't going to stop any evictions from happening. But I think it's interesting because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a member of the squad, gave an interview today in which she actually pointed out that this is Democrats' fault. You know, they campaigned on getting Trump out of office. They campaigned on putting Democrats into power in the House, in the Senate, and in the White House. They accomplished that. And yet, right now, they can't do something as little as extending a ban on evictions when you're talking about 15 million Americans that are being put at risk. Not a good look for the Democrats going into 2024 at all.
In fact, like the other farm animals in Animal Farm, I'm looking through the window at American politics. I'm looking from pig to man and man to pig and pig back to man, and finding it impossible to tell the difference between the two. If we look at the threat to attack Iran made by your Secretary of State this very evening, if we look at the attitude of Donald Trump to Saudi Arabia, to the Yemen war, to the crimes being committed against the Palestinian people, towards Cuba, towards Venezuela. If I look at all the foreign policy rafts, I see no difference between pig and man. And now, when I'm looking at the domestic situation through the window, I'm still seeing no difference.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that this is one of those cases where we've learned over the last 20 years, Congress has been reminded that it doesn't matter if they sell us a fake war on terrorism. It doesn't matter if they pass bills that literally allow them to spy on us in the name of patriotism. It doesn't matter if they allow 15 million Americans to be evicted. Clearly, these members of Congress are not concerned at all about being reelected themselves. I mean, you would think that they would want to make sure that they were doing everything in their power to fight for the American people who voted them into office, who support them at the end of the day, yet they don't seem to be concerned at all. But when you look at Congress getting together every single year and passing, $700 billion in defense spending, they magically do it without a single debate, without any argument on their end. And yet it's those two parties that seem to be so different that somehow magically come together, because that is where their loyalties lie. And they have proven that over and over again.
Yeah, and got reelected over and over again. Whether this will change in this cycle remains to be seen. They haven't given up on trying to put Donald Trump out of the game, have they? They're now on his tax issues. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I know if you paid attention to U.S. politics over the last few years, you've probably heard about Donald Trump's tax returns a few dozen times. Now it looks like the Department of Justice, now that it's under President Biden, is going to move forward with forcing the IRS to turn over those tax returns to Congress. Congress is going to try to see if they can get some sort of conviction to stick against Trump for tax fraud, insurance fraud, and banking fraud. Now, this is against both Trump and his organization. The thing to remember here that's actually really notable is that, let's say that they charge Trump, let's say that they convict him and they send him off to prison. Well, guess what? He can still run again in 2024. He can campaign from behind prison bars if that's what it takes. Now, what the Democrats are hoping for, of course, is that if they can get some kind of a conviction to stick, that will hurt him enough politically that Americans will look at him and say, well, we don't want to send him to the White House again, because then it's just going to be this ongoing political struggle. And that's all that he's going to focus on, is the politics of it for, the 4 years that he's in office. But you also have to look at the other section of the American population, which says that when you see this resistance movement against him, when you see this pressure built up against him, that makes them support him that much more.
He's still in command of the Republican Party, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely. And I think they have yet to put up another challenger, so to speak, that will really take him on, especially when it comes to fundraising. And so we're going to continue to see this kind of battle back and forth. But what's interesting is he hasn't yet officially thrown his hat in the ring for 2024. But I think that's only a matter of time until we see him do that, especially if it's one of those cases where Congress really tries to bring a case against him, then he is going to go right back against them that much further.
Now, I forced myself to read 1,660 words in the New York Times today, telling me that it was really not that important that America, which used to dominate the medal table at the Olympic Games, now very definitely doesn't. How have the people in the US adjusted to the fact that in the Olympic Games, at least, they're no longer king?
It's been a really bizarre week when it comes to the Olympics. I know that there was a lot of news about gymnast Simone Biles. And what was almost all the more bizarre was how angry people were with her for saying that she wasn't going to compete in certain competitions, for saying that she was going to put her mental health first. And I think that this should bring up a much bigger conversation about just how the U.S. handles these sports, and specifically how they handle gymnastics, because we have to remember that Simone Biles is one of the more than 150 young girls who was sexually abused by Larry Nassar. And not only did the entire Olympic Committee, when it comes to, gymnastics here in the United States, not only did they allow for that to happen, but we're now learning new reports finding out that the FBI also allowed it to happen. Now, why they would do such a thing is absolutely insane all around, but I think that it's really going to bring the United States to a place where we have to look at exactly how we handle these Olympic Games. And you know what? If we're in a place where it is costing us gold medals, then that's on the U.S., I think, whenever, it comes to something like this.
Lastly, it's only just broken, and you may not be across it, but Blinken has found Iran guilty without a trial of having attacked an Israeli-owned tanker in the Persian Gulf and promised an appropriate response. If you know about it, what do you think he means by that?
You know, we've watched the United States government continue to use these claims of all options are on the table when it comes to Iran, when it comes to Venezuela. I mean, in terms of what the Biden administration means, exactly like you said, there has yet to be any kind of trial. We don't know what sort of evidence they're dealing with, or we don't know whether they're just going on the claims of their super close ally, Israel. So I think that we're going to continue to hear more from them. But for Blinken to make a statement like that should be concerning to many Americans, especially as they're looking at those tensions that we've seen between the U.S. and Iran, and especially as they're looking at that hope that they had for the Biden administration to secure the nuclear deal, to have some sort of peace with Iran. Now they're going in the opposite. It's also a reminder that, as we've been talking about here, it's not all that different from what the Trump administration did.
No, not at all. And of course, if someone wanted to stop any rapprochement between Iran and the United States, if they wanted to stop the United States rejoining the nuclear deal, well, they'd attack an Israeli tanker just to scupper it all, wouldn't they?
That they would. And we also have to remember that Israel has repeatedly warned the Biden administration not to go back to that deal. I mean, they've been the first people saying no talks, no deal whatsoever. And so it is interesting that that's where the blame gets pushed immediately before we've had time to look at any sort of evidence.
I said lastly, but this is really lastly. What about appointing Juan Guaido as the president of Peru? After all, the U.S. can't fancy the guy that was elected to the job.
You know, that sounds exactly like something they would do, to throw out some kind of puppet who is exactly in line with the CIA and who does not have public support. I mean, in this day and age, that would not surprise me one bit.
Nor me. Rachel Blevins, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let's take some calls. Rose is in Philadelphia. How could I refuse? Rose, welcome.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Galloway.
Good evening.
Last time I talked to you, last time I talked to you was your 100th episode during the. It was a great occasion, of course, your 100th episode, but it was during the Israeli war on Gaza, and just recently.
Well, some things never change, Rose.
Of course. No, not at all. Not at all. But yes, I was just calling you today to speak about Lebanon. I mean, it has just been a ticking time bomb for even since before the pandemic, since before the tragic explosion. And just recently, about 1 week ago, the Lebanese prime minister resigned, actually blaming Hezbollah and blaming anybody else affiliated with Hezbollah, and then concluding with God help the country. So, of course, he's probably going to go into exile somewhere and not handle any of the responsibilities, but it's only, of course, going to worsen the sectarian divisions in Lebanon, because, you know, many of the Sunni Muslims will likely remain loyal to the Hariri family, and the Shia Muslims will remain loyal to Hezbollah. And it's just going to keep getting worse, this division, unless the Lebanese people unite and create a government of their own making. But we don't know how that's
Well, I think
really
that's brilliantly summarized. It was, of course, the Christian president of Lebanon that forced the prime minister's resignation by demanding that fraud on an epic, globally epic level inside the Bank of Lebanon, which has played a part in the economic collapse of the country. The prime minister was resisting any such investigation of the governor of the bank. But the resignation was carefully coordinated, as was the shooting on a very massive funeral today of a leading figure, supporter of Hezbollah. Somebody somewhere is trying to light a fire, Rose.
Absolutely, and it's going to. The corruption is just absolutely rampant from these outside influences, and Lebanon is also just recently still has started to suffer from wildfires in the north. And speaking of investigating corrupt officials, the families of the victims of the August 4th explosion last year were attacked during their demonstration to try and get those officials held accountable and to trial. So that is another huge issue that is yet to be addressed and is still being
There are a lot of fuses burning their way towards the explosives. Thanks, Rose, in Philadelphia. Let's take Sarkar in Glasgow. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Hi, George. Good evening. Really nice to see you keep healthy.
And you, thank you. Nice to hear your voice again. Go on.
Oh, thanks. George, I have a small question, not a small question. Actually, it's about Afghanistan.
Yes.
This is 20 years of the anniversary of the bombing of Afghanistan since 2001. Started with George Bush era, then Obama carried on, and right now Biden is saying he'll withdraw all the troops. I'm not a fan of Taliban, I must clearly say that. But I need to ask you one question, George. Trillions of dollars lost, countless lives lost. For supposedly the bombing started 20 years ago to remove Taliban to instill democracy. Now, this is today's news. Taliban have gained ground so much in Afghanistan, and you know what happened a few days ago? Some of the Afghan soldiers were running helter-skelter to other countries. 20 years of bombing. God knows how many lives lost. Trillions of dollars, which could have been invested in food, education, jobs. This is the condition of the country, and the same goes for Iraq and Libya. What's going on with our Western policies, George?
Well, they are, of course, disastrous for all but a few. The military-industrial complex has profited mightily. The politicians that suck on the teat of the military-industrial complex have become bloated and probably not sated. And the people of the countries you refer to have paid with their lives in the number of millions. And if you include the maimed and the wounded and the disturbed and the destruction of property and infrastructure, this has been 20 years of unmitigated disaster. And the politicians who embarked upon it are all still cock of the walk, Sarkar. George Bush is getting medals. Tony Blair is on television daily, almost, opining about everything from COVID-19 to the situation in Africa and so on. The people responsible for what has been a cataclysmic disaster have all been enriched and promoted. And that makes it somehow even more difficult to swallow. As I predicted 20 years ago, the people we were driving out of power in Afghanistan would drive right back into power in Afghanistan as soon as we withdrew from Afghanistan. All that money and all that ocean of blood has all been entirely wasted. Sarkar, thanks for the call. Let me squeeze in what I can here. Gerard White on an email says, the video evidence about slavery in Tibet before the Chinese invasion is too horrific to show. To suffice to say, the Tibetans were the worst slave masters ever, including the Dalai Lama. And Futso uses my Groucho Marx quote, these are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others. You can still vote, by the way. How much money would it take for you to sell out your principles? You can vote on my Twitter feed. Let's hear from Alison in London. Go ahead, Alison.
Good evening, George.
Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, you too. Love your show.
Thanks.
I'm calling about the abominable act of the incarceration of Julian Assange and Craig Murray.
Yeah.
They're both in jail because of political vendettas by the US and Nicola Sturgeon. They're both peaceful intellectuals and journalists, and like they do to intellectuals in rogue states, they get silenced as threats to the systems now in place. Now, you spoke of Malthusian theorists behind the New World Agenda earlier. We've just had the biggest transfer of wealth to the elite in modern history. How can this be useful for the WEF's stated aims of sustainable development? We're being put in poverty and slavery system. In London, we've still got Roman plumbing, it seems. And in the Pacific, the great plastic patches, you can walk for miles on that, Greta. So we need change, and we need to get out of this basically planet prison that they're going to put us in, where we're going to have a digital ID wallet tied to a vaccine passport, tied to a UBI, so Jeff Bezos can buy more phallic space rockets to fly 53 miles above the Earth. The
I couldn't put it better than that, Alison. I won't try to. The only thing I'd add is if he does go into space, I hope he keeps on travelling. Thank you.
That's what I thought too.
Thank you.
Really, George, the elephant in the room is war.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
You've noted tonight many times, and so has my heartthrob Afshin Rattansi, that we're on a war footing at the moment. And the US is the biggest polluter US military is the biggest polluter on Earth. Yeah? So none of the sustainable goals, development goals of the WEF or Klaus Schwab or Greta or any of them, XR, Extinction Rebellion, mention war as the biggest threat to people and the planet these days. And who alerted us to this was Julian Assange. And where is he? Silenced in a solitary confinement in prison. And I just want to call on people who are reasonable, good, moral people to come to the US appeal on the grounds, the preliminary hearing for the US to appeal the grounds on which they refused extradition on August the 11th at the Royal Courts of Justice in London. If you're in London, please come, just stand there and show them that you're opposed to this persecution of Julian Assange.
That was such a good call. I'm going to forgive you for naming Afshan as your heartthrob. Thanks very much for the call. Hussein is in Cyprus. Let's hear from him.
Hello, George.
Nice to hear from you, sir. Go ahead.
Firstly, I'd like to give kudos to Alison. Wonderful call.
Wasn't it? Definitely the call of the night, call of the week, call of the month.
Yeah. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, okay, I wanted to draw your attention to, you were talking about it earlier, this deal with the US underperforming during the Olympics, basically.
Yes. It doesn't matter, apparently, according to the New York Times.
Well, it doesn't matter according to the New York Times, but when you think about it, it's so telling, isn't it? I mean, when that beautiful piece of advice that says people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Yes.
It comes to mind when we're face to face with a ridiculous situation where Russian athletes cannot compete as Russia, and they cannot have their national anthem played, despite the fact that they are Russian athletes, and they are competing
they're
as
competing
Russians.
for the Russian Olympic Committee.
They're competing for the Russian Olympic Committee, and it's ridiculous. They stand there, and their national anthem isn't played, and something is played by Tchaikovsky, apparently, whatever. It's just ridiculous. But when you think about it, Rachel Blevins, she referred to Simone Biles, wonderful athlete, wonderful gymnast, but she neglected to mention that Simone Biles, in order to compete, she has exemption for her ADHD, attention deficiency hyperactivity disorder. Now, she has Olympic exemption, from what I've learned, so that she is allowed to use, it's either Ritalin or Adderall, one of these medications for ADHD. And when using these medications, she's able to compete. But the basis of these medications is they are what you call, how can I lose the word? Amphetamines. They are amphetamines. Now, amphetamines, they enhance performance and they enhance concentration. And quite by chance, apparently the Japanese have a very hard stance towards amphetamines, purely for the reason that during the Second World War, the kamikaze pilots, they were given amphetamines in order to be able to basically fly their aircraft into carriers and other American ships. Now, Simone Biles, wonderful athlete as she is, my heart goes out to the poor girl. I mean, she's only 24. My heart goes out to her. But, on the other hand, when you think about it, America is underperforming now because of all the pressure they've put on Russia. I feel as though they are unable to cheat themselves. And that's basically what it boils down to. That's my opinion.
A remarkable call, Hussein. You've taught me a lot of things I didn't know. Thanks very much for making it. Now, in this week, talking of the Olympics, at the 1936 Berlin Olympics, the great Jesse Owen won the 200 meters. How many golds did he win in total? How many gold medals did Jesse Owens win in total? A, 1, B, 4, C, 6. Answers. And Patrick Christie, right after this break.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It has filled our hospitals. It has killed 400 doctors, nurses, and care home professionals. Friends of mine have died of it. So what exactly are you on here telling me? That it's not infectious?
I'm not sure.
Tell us what you think. Don't be coy, Roy.
Well, I'm going to quote Doctor, and he said that the pandemic was over a long time ago in a video, an unlocked video, and it's going around right now. You know, you can watch it for yourself.
You guys are always doing your research on the internet. Look.
Okay.
Yeah, see, you have got a point of view. You are being coy, Roy. You come on here playing the daft laddie. I just saw something on the government's website. Something I can choose between Ben in Hull on YouTube, or I can trust the doctors and the medical authorities. I can trust them, or I can go with wee Ben.
I mean, I'm not.
Wee Ben on YouTube.
On the Gov website.
Well, what are you saying?
These are statistics.
Tell us then. Look, you started out by saying COVID was not an infectious disease. Are you really saying that? Are you really saying that, Ben? Ben, stop being silly. Are you really saying that the coronavirus 19 is not infectious? Ben, are you really saying that?
I'm repeating what has been stated on the government website.
But I already explained to you that it was otherwise thus classified. It is a public health emergency. Aren't you aware of it? Don't you know the cost we've paid of it? Don't you know how many people have died? How many people are sick? How many doctors and nurses are dead now in the cold earth, fighting something that you're on the radio telling me doesn't exist? I have no longer any patience for this kind of juvenile nonsense.
Radio Sputnik. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
The great Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals. US athletes won 11 golds at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. And to Adolf Hitler's great chagrin, 6 of them were won by black athletes, with Jesse Owens winning 4. We're joined by a definite gold medal media winner. Patrick Christys, I have known since he was a young boy. You may say he's still a young boy, but he's destined for great things. And we've been lucky enough to interview him many times. Patrick, welcome to the show. Now, let me justify why I ran a poll today, this evening, on Boris Johnson's baby. I congratulated him and his missus. Any birth is a gift, is a blessing. But if it's true, and most of our viewers and listeners think it was true, that this man now has at least 8 children to keep, at least 2 alimony bills to pay, it is undoubtedly true that he'll find that difficult to do on 150 grand less tax, because you get no tax relief for child benefits, child payments, maintenance, and alimony. So none of them will be able to go to private school. He won't be able to go on any luxury holidays, which means one of 2 things. Either the Prime Minister will have to step down and go and earn big money, or he lays himself open to corrupting assistance from rich people.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think it'll probably be the latter. Boris Johnson already has quite a wealthy cabal of donors, both personal and to the party, and those donors, some of them have seen quite significant rewards, i.e. finding their way into the House of Lords or whatever. And so I think Boris Johnson is viewed as gettable by a lot of people, and indeed he is gettable by a lot of people. Even if you look at some of, for example, Carrie at the moment, she doesn't have inexpensive tastes. So, this is going to be an issue for him. There are constantly the drip, drip, drip in the media of whether or not Boris Johnson can afford to continue to be Prime Minister. He's got a really interesting personal battle now. For a man who's only ever singularly wanted to be Prime Minister for power, not because of some kind of deep-seated ideology that wants to make the country better, just that to hold that great office of state and to get 2 fingers up to some of the other people in the bully and 2 fingers up to some of the people like your David Camerons of this world. He now has a difficult decision whether or not he continues with that or whether he opens himself up to essentially influence from some very wealthy donors. And does that not demean the great office of state that the Prime Minister is? And so I think that's kind of where he's at. And indeed it is already happening in a way. What will be fascinating is how long that goes on for before actually, it kind of is outed, and indeed there is any discrepancies there. The other big question is, how much good to those people is Boris Johnson when he isn't Prime Minister? What can he really do for them when he isn't Prime Minister? And given that we're really tightening now the lobbying laws around what former Prime Ministers can do, it's going to be interesting to see how that one pans out.
And if you have to leave office under a cloud because of, say, a scandal that someone disreputable paid your kids Eton fees, which are not inconsiderable, I understand, then you're even less useful after you leave office to such people. One man who doesn't have to worry about any of these things, partly because he's led a blameless life, but mainly because he's a billionaire or married to one, is Rishi Sunak. Now, there are reports that Rishi had a meeting this week with Lytton Crosby, the current Prime Minister's election guru. What might they have been discussing?
Well, it's interesting because I've heard on and off for the last couple of years that Linton and Boris have had in themselves a bit of an on-off relationship, OK? And so actually that's quite interesting. That might be interesting to see where the land currently lies there and how good their relationship is at the moment. Certainly you don't want Linton Crosby going against you. At times Linton Crosby has not been Boris Johnson's favourite person and vice versa. Rishi Sunak is obviously a man on manoeuvres. He is deemed to be quite squeaky clean, or very squeaky clean. He is deemed to be a bit more down with the kids, as it were. I think what also Rishi Sunak is starting to do is position himself, as kind of opposing Boris on certain lockdown strategies, opposing Boris on various things like that. And so actually he's opening up that gap a little bit. And I do wonder whether or not we're going to start seeing that kind of famous Blair-Brown rift that we had all those years ago. Rishi Sunak clearly is a bloke there who I think actually a lot of Conservatives would quite like, not because he's deemed to be, particularly popular in the backbenches or anything like that, but I think if you look at the level of civil liberties and the level that Boris Johnson has taken off people and the level of disappointment that this so-called libertarian has dished out to the libertarian wing of the Tory party, they're now so angry with Boris Johnson that they might not come back to him. And at least Rishi Sunak will be out of the kind of coffee sneezy woods of the coronavirus restrictions by the time that he emerges. Also, another element of it is the Conservative Party and members in it love sticking it to Labour when they go, well, we've had 2 female leaders? Or how good would it be if they had the first ethnic minority Prime Minister as well? That would be another stick that they could beat the Labour Party with.
He could be the British Obama.
The British Obama, yeah. I mean, he is quite a cool dude for a Conservative. You know, in that sense, he wears a hoodie, and I think that's basically...
He wears a hoodie, he wears
yeah.
sneakers.
Yeah.
I saw a picture of him in Glasgow the other day. How is it going on this front that you refer to, this libertarian versus authoritarian, push me, pull me? We've veered one way, then the other, then back again. Are they really going to try and introduce a vaccine passport?
Well, this is interesting, right, because I think for far too long Boris Johnson, and this really, I think, started with Dominic Cummings, although it's taken a different stance now, which is they were ruled by the opinion polls, OK? But I think all too often now there's been a massive discrepancy between the opinion polls and what reality is. So I saw an opinion poll published in The Guardian yesterday. 95% of UK adults still wear masks in public. That overtly isn't true. That overtly is not true. You go up and down the country, I can see that's not true.
It's absolute...
Yeah.
B-O-L-L-O-C-K-S.
But that's the kind of data that maybe Boris Johnson is basing his opinions on. And when it comes to things like, you know, you'll see polls, 58% of people want a continuation of coronavirus restrictions. I don't really believe that that's actually true. And if this is where he's making his decisions from now, you only have to see if he's looking at data on vaccine passports that he could have that stance. What we're seeing now on vaccine passports is the demand for the recall of Parliament over this, right? And I think, yeah, absolutely has to. It's such a massive issue, right? Now, I think that you're going to end up seeing about at least 40 Conservative MPs vote against. You've obviously got the Lib Dems, you've got the Labour Party as well. So there is now cross-party support. You're also seeing Conservative MPs saying they're not going to go to Tory party conference if they have to have vaccine passports as well. That's more of a symbolic gesture than the fact that Steve Baker won't be there to give a speech. I'm not sure people are going to lose too much sleep over that. But they're already actually introducing it by stealth anyway. There's already an allocation on the coronavirus app, which is a vaccine passport angle of it. Also, one of the big issues, and I think this is quite a massive problem, is that I suspect that they're going to end up linking the vaccine passport to things like government-sponsored fitness apps that give you incentives if you do the right amount of steps and things like that. And that's being mooted that could happen. I worry that we're going to create a two-tier society here because you're going to end up with people who either had an adverse reaction to the first coronavirus jab and are therefore being told not to get the second, people who for whatever reason simply can't. And also there are people out there who just genuinely don't want it, and they should still be allowed to go about their business, in my opinion. You know, they shouldn't be end up being shackled to you know, Chris Ritchie's radiator in his basement, you know.
People are biddable. We know now that Piers Corbyn's price, we now know that.
Which is not that much, actually.
Rather cheap. If they'd known they could have him for 10,000, they would have done it long ago. But people are biddable. You're going to get an Uber, you're going to get a Burger King, you're going to... I mean, isn't this all just scaremongering to drive people into the injection?
And so this is the other area where it all falls down, because you end up with Dominic Raab, who to me always looks like a rabbit just before you hit it with your car, right? And he was there saying, oh, well, actually, you know what, we're only talking about vaccine passports for kids because then we're going to get the 18 to 30-year-olds signed up. And they're like, why have you just said that, Dom? Our plan's been blown out of the water. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? And I think that's a real issue. This is the kind of like the parent-child relationship that the state doesn't need to adopt with us, OK, where they go, well, look, we'll just threaten them with this, and then we'll hope that they end up doing the right thing. They're already apparently maybe rowing back on things like university students needing to be double jabbed to go into campus and be in halls of residence. They've just said, well, we didn't rule it out. OK, fine, but I don't think people respond too well to this level of coercion and trickery, I think, a lot of the time.
Here's a call from Amin in London. Go ahead, Amin.
Yeah, hi, George.
Hi.
Look, George, I just wanted to make a point. I mean, this issue with Pierre Corbyn, the way he was sort of cornered by these journalists. I think it's a little bit underhand the way these journalists operate. It did really remind me of. I don't know if you remember the issue of the fake sheikh back in the day.
Very well. He tried and failed to hoodwink me.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I still think I should sue Rupert Murdoch over it, but never mind. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's hardly the catch of the year, right? With Piers Corbyn.
No, it's not the catch of the year, but I'm pretty sure he's very embarrassed about it.
Yeah, and, you know, who's to say? You know, I mean, maybe he had an intention to go and, once this so-called deal had been sealed, to go and actually expose these journalists themselves. You know, I mean, we just can't say. It's just
well,
real shame.
If you believe that, I mean, I've got a bridge here in London I could sell you, going very cheap.
I'll take it.
No, look, I mean, I have no animus towards Piers Corbyn, but he's been a complete fool, hasn't he, Patrick?
Look, he has. I think one thing that stood out for me is that Piers Corbyn probably needs money. Right, and I suspect that's where
he's
this
as poor as a church mouse.
Right, and so I think there's an element of that. In that sense, I felt a bit sorry for him. I do think that is the price he's obviously paid for his principles. He is obviously a little bit kooky and out there anyway. What I will say, though, is I think there's a wider issue here, which I think it's done quite a lot of damage to the credibility of people who are just genuinely sceptical about these vaccines, who do want to see more long-term data, who do, for whatever reason, personally, through no kind of being, without being an anti-vaxxer, right, do just want maybe a little bit more information about it or are a bit fearful about it. Now, it's very easy to shepherd them into the Piers Corbyn bracket, isn't it? And you do wonder what damage that him, you know, his actions have done to them, you know?
I mean, last word to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really at a loss to sort of understand who really gets damaged by this. Was it actually this Piers Corbyn, or was it his brother Jeremy Corbyn?
No, Jeremy's nothing like that. Would never have done that. Would never have sold out. Jeremy's nothing like that. But on the other hand, Jeremy's got money, and Piers doesn't have money. And I think that's what drove it. But I should say that the money was being given for the campaign. It wasn't necessarily going to end up on Piers Corbyn's dinner table. But this group was being cheered to the echo by the same people rubbishing them now when they lured Katie Hopkins to some European capital and gave her the TWAT award. And she flew there and accepted it and gave an acceptance speech, not realising that these chaps had hoodwinked her. So, you know, you can run with the hare or the hounds, but you can't really run with both. I mean, thanks very much for that call. What else is happening then, media-wise? I see that the owners of GB News may be interested in making a bid for Channel 4 News. For Channel 4.
Yeah.
It came as a big surprise to people when I revealed quite recently that the public has to pay for Channel 4. What's the earthly justification of taking our money to pay Channel 4 that very few of us watch, and some of us are driven into apoplexy if we do?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. I think from a big commercial perspective, it's an interesting one for the owners of GB News and Discovery and Disney and all that to do, because it diversifies the brand as well, and I think you can see why that would make sense. I think Channel 4 has got a huge amount of potential. There's a lot of elements of Channel 4 that you could see there could actually work, and it's not being done. And I think a part of it is because it's not overtly 100% a commercial enterprise, right? And I think that would add a bit of pressure, and it would also give a bit of impetus to them. I think they've gone a bit up themselves, for want of a better phrase, and they've become a little bit too artsy and too flouncy, and a little bit like the BBC. They almost don't have to care about ratings because they know the funding's coming and they know there's a certain amount of people who watch them all the time anyway. And actually, if they had to bow down in the face of commercial pressures, and dare I say it as well, maybe be given a bit of a kick at the backside from people across the pond there in America to actually deliver on that kind of thing, then maybe we would see a better product. Fundamentally, I do think that the overall landscape of the British media now is potentially looking pretty good, because you're getting loads of pressure on the BBC from your streamers, you like to see Netflix, etc. They're going to have to start doing something about that if they want to exist, frankly, going forward. We are now seeing the fact that they're actually going to have to start lowering some of their staff's wages, which, again, I think might be good for the general level of smugness on our TV screens. But also, if Channel 4 gets a bit of a shot in the arm, that could be interesting. GB News is a fabulous addition to the media landscape. And so you've got all of this stuff
doing all right now, yeah. It's come off the floor.
It is doing all right, and there's a voice for it, and there's a need for it. And so I think, actually, if you just look, it's quite a good time, right, to be a viewer in this country now, if you like that kind of stuff, you know?
Very interesting. Let's hear from Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. Hello, Patrick.
Lovely to hear your voice. Go ahead.
Well, I'm actually a bit annoyed because I think Barry Silkman and yourself were being a bit churlish about the Olympics.
Oh dear. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, because first of all, I think there's been a lot of coverage. BBC 1, 2, Red Button, Eurosport 1 and 2. So that's been okay. And secondly, today has been, for people who like it, very interesting. It's been lovely. A Venezuelan girl, she won a triple jump gold. She beat the world record. She was overjoyed. Italy have been doing remarkably well, and they did beat us, didn't they?
They're not usually giants in the Olympic ring, as it were.
No. They did beat us in the football, man.
Well, they're very good at football, yes. How have Cuba done in the boxing?
Well, I don't watch the boxing much.
I think they've cleaned up. I heard that they'd cleaned up. How is Britain doing? I see the rowers. The rowers sank without trace. And we always win the rowing.
Yeah, we didn't do well on that. But you see, I watch the athletics mostly.
Mm-hmm.
We've done okay. I mean, USA, very disappointing. But, you know, when you talk about excitement, in the high jump, this Italian shared the gold, never been known before, with a man from Qatar. And they were just hugging each other. And then we had great hopes for one of our, Dina Asher-Smith, who I don't expect you know, but she's very, very prominent in the athletics world for the 100 metres. And she got injured, but 3 Jamaicans won first, second and third, and they were fantastic,
wow.
You know?
That is amazing. What is it about Jamaicans? They sure can run.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, I know that running is a very popular sport over there in Jamaica. I think there's probably one of their favourite pastimes. I think from the moment you can walk, you can literally run in Jamaica, which is obviously great. Yeah.
It is amazing, Norma. 1, 2, and 3, Jamaica.
Yeah, they did in the 100 metres.
And they've all got double-barreled names. It's a good advertisement for married people doing the double-barreled name trick.
And they both had babies, the first and second, you know?
They've both had babies. That is remarkable, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're enjoying the Olympics, and I'm just a churl. I haven't watched any of it, but partly that's for other reasons, pressure of work and travel and all the rest. But I just felt, and Barry agreed with me, that there wasn't much buzz about the Olympics.
Yeah, because it's actually been compromised quite a lot. But I've had quite a buzz today, and it makes such a change from all the unhappy and complicated news that we have, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it. Are you watching it?
Not really, but I have seen bits of it. I like watching it on fast forward, but you can't do that with 100 metres, though, to be fair, because it would be over very, very quickly. Yeah, but the Italian guy did win the 100 metres as well, which I thought was a fantastic effort, of course. Yeah. And they had to interrupt an interview that he was doing because the Italian PM was on the line to him straight away. You don't get that, do you, with Boris Johnson?
No.
You know, yeah. Boris is on the phone. Actually, I don't know.
Don't tempt him. Did you know that, Norma, that the Italian gentleman had won the 100 metres? I didn't.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
I can't recall that ever happening before.
No. I mean, our poor man, I did feel sorry for him, but he was eliminated. He was eliminated because
our man
he had
was eliminated.
Start. Yeah, he was. But I mean, honestly, it's been very good, and I just felt I needed to pep up on that.
No, well, you've defended the honour of the Olympic Games. Thanks, Norma, for doing so. Bread and circuses, is it diverting the public's attention? Public seem to be at quite a low political ebb, in my view.
Oh, absolutely. There's so many people out there right now who are completely politically homeless. There's loads of people in the Labour Party who don't feel like they can vote for this current version of the Labour Party. There's loads of Conservatives out there who really don't want to vote for Boris Johnson ever again. The only point there is, I suppose, that the Liberal Democrats are pretty solid, but you can fit them all in the back of a Mini Cooper anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, although growing, I think the smaller parties, I've got a reason, of course, for hoping so, but smaller parties are going to be the thing in the next period. I think the hegemony of the big two, if you include the Liberals even, the big three, is coming to an end.
Because I think that mirrors society, and it touches back on something we were saying before, wasn't it, about all the different streaming networks, this, that and the other. Now, with the Instagram society, everyone's so niche and into so many different things, it's almost impossible for one overt political party to encapsulate everyone's interest.
Thank you, Patrick. Download, if you will, the podcast, which is now being listened to in 42 countries. Can you believe that? The downloads were up 60%. It's absolutely extraordinary. The audience for the mother of all talk shows continues to grow and grow and grow. And I have you to thank for that. And of course, wonderful guests like Patrick Christys, who is going from strength to strength. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. Join me next week, if so.